Chapter 1952. This feeling is indeed not bad. Josh walked out of the Magus Tower. His eyes gradually returned to normal, and a mysterious smile appeared on his face. This is just the tip of the iceberg. As long as you can start a war, your power will continue to increase. When that time comes, no one in this world will be a match for you. The devil's low voice sounded in his mind. Next, I'm going to the Ministry of War, Josh ordered the coachman as he boarded the horse-drawn carriage. Not long after, a few urgent letters were sent from the Ministry of War to the border using the fastest falcon. At the same time, a black griffin silently rose from the palace and flew toward the northwestern border. Return to the forest immediately and activate the highest level of combat readiness. Guard against the Roth Empire's invasion. Helena ordered an elf. High Priestess, the Roth Empire is our friend. They have established a peace alliance. Now that the Roth Empire only has us as their friend, they can't possibly attack us, right? That elf asked perplexedly. There are no eternal friends in this world. Don't expect a sly fox like Andre to keep his word, Helena said coldly. Yes, I will return to the forest immediately. That elf's expression turned serious, and he quickly left. The Wind Forest had spent most of its energy on the goblins in recent years, and had almost no defenses against the Roth Empire. If the Roth Empire really attacked the Wind Forest, it would undoubtedly be a disaster. Of course, that elf still didn't believe that the Roth Empire would attack their friendly friend. I'm afraid the giant dragons won't give up their territory so easily. They are famous for being stingy. How can they give their territory away? Michael said to Meg, who he had invited to his study. If the Roth Empire only wants this piece of territory, their request is actually not too much. They can sign the peace treaty reasonably and peacefully, and let the Norland continent enjoy another 100 years of peace. The giant dragons are still the same giant dragons, but the Roth Empire is no longer the weak country it used to be. They have to face all of this seriously. If Crassus and I had stood behind Andre in today's peace conference, the contrast would have been even more obvious. Meg shook his head slightly. Michael nodded in agreement. Yes, if the two of you had stood behind Andre instead of opposing him, he would have had more confidence. I want to know Chaos City's attitude. If the Roth Empire attacks the orcs, will you send reinforcements? Meg asked as he looked into Michael's eyes. Of course. Michael nodded seriously. All right. Meg nodded slightly. Father, I'm afraid that the colossal dragon tribe will not agree to our request so easily. If they don't agree, we'll have a reason to start a war. If the giant dragons would agree so easily, why would I make such a request? Andre looked at Sean with a smile. Sean looked pensive. He hesitated for a moment before asking, how does Father plan to deal with Alex? No matter how strong Alex is, he's still just one person. We don't have to care about him. Andre's smile was filled with confidence. But he's much stronger now than he was 3 years ago. If we leave him alone, he'll be a huge threat to us. Sean thought about how Alex broke through the blockade of 6 10th-tier powerhouses, easily killed his way to him, and then broke his arm. His face was still slightly pale. He's become stronger and sly. It's impossible to ambush him like we did 3 years ago. Since that's the case, why don't we just let him be? Given his character, he'll appear in front of the army sooner or later. When that time comes, Andre's lips curled into a cold smile. The 1-hour intermission passed very quickly. However, due to the huge disagreement within the giant dragons, Andre's conditions could not be reached, and the meeting fell into an anxious wrangling again. Meg had already expected this. The giant dragons were not afraid of the Roth Empire. At least, the Roth Empire was still far from being a threat to the Dragon Island in the sky. However, the existence of the Great Old One made the giant dragons feel a fatal threat. Above the giant dragons, there was an existence with terrifying power, and this existence was filled with malice towards this world. The half of the Great Old One in the Thunderstorm Mountains made them deeply feel this difference. That was the difference when he used to look down on the ants on the ground. It was just that they had become ants now. Hence, the giant dragons took the initiative to ask for cooperation, and even took the initiative to set up a peace alliance with the other races. Meanwhile, Andre, who had a generous personality, did not put the Great Old One in the first place at all. Instead, he used it as one of the bargaining chips in the negotiation. Once the Roth Empire started a war, it would definitely sweep across the Norland continent. If the Great Old One appeared then, the Norland continent would face the awkward situation of not being able to organize an effective resistance and counterattack. Just like that, the whole morning passed without any results. Dracula yawned and turned to ask Camilla, "This kind of meeting is indeed super boring. We can't even get a word in. Can we go to Mamie's for lunch?" "Mamie's is closed today." Camilla shook her head. "Ah, what a sad piece of news." Dracula sighed. Meg took advantage of the lunch break to go home to cook for Amy and before returning to the city, Lord's Castle. This was a power struggle between the Roth Empire and the giant dragons. His influence was limited. Now, it was a matter of who would compromise first. The negotiations in the afternoon fell into a stalemate again. The various races in the Peace Alliance all came down to express their support for the giant dragons and the orcs. However, Andre still refused to budge and insisted on half of the giant dragon's territory. Just when everyone thought that today's negotiations would come to an end, an urgent secret letter was delivered to the leaders of the various races present. "Bastard! Andre, you old man, you actually launched a sneak attack." Oster slammed the table and stood up, glaring at Andre with bloodshot eyes. His hand that was holding the secret letter was trembling. Andre frowned slightly, as if he did not understand the reason for Oster's anger. Sean handed a military report that he had just received to Andre with a complicated expression and softly said, "An urgent letter from the Northwest Border Army. The 36 Orc tribes have been taken down." Andre's frown deepened. He took the secret letter and scanned it quickly. His face darkened. Helena also stood up with a dark expression and coldly shouted, "Andre, the elves have been on good terms with the Roth Empire for hundreds of years. Why did you send troops to invade the Wind Forest?" Chapter 1953. There was an uproar at the meeting, and the various representatives couldn't hide their shock. The peace talks hadn't ended yet, and the Roth Empire actually attacked the orcs and elves at the same time, without any warning. The orcs and the Roth Empire had been at odds for a long time, so it was understandable that they would be attacked. However, the elves and the Roth Empire had been on good terms for generations, and they had even formed an alliance during the racial war. The Roth Empire suddenly attacked the elves, and everyone couldn't understand what Andre was planning. "What the hell is this?" Meg was also shocked. He didn't expect Andre to let the army attack the orcs and elves on the first day of the peace talks, and he was still sitting here. This bastard. The elves didn't put up any defenses against the Roth Empire all these years. Now that they suddenly attacked, I'm afraid the Wind Forest will fall soon. Irina's expression also darkened. The night elves could mess around, but it was still the elves' business. However, it was different now that the Roth Empire had invaded. This concerned the survival of the elves. "Master, what should we do now?" Connie had also received the urgent report. The tribes near the Roth Empire's borders had all been conquered, and they were advancing west quickly. The orcs had no one to organize them now, so they couldn't form a large-scale resistance. They were retreating quickly. "If Andre doesn't withdraw the army, we will have to go back immediately." Rex's expression was also a little dark. "Andre, what are you doing?" Lewis shouted at Andre. "There are still 10 days before the peace treaty expires. Do you want to break the rules that were set back then?" Andre's expression quickly recovered from the momentary shock. He looked at Lewis and calmly said, "Since you are still not making a decision, the Roth Empire will show you our determination. We can do anything to survive. The elves are at fault for what happened today. Andre, if you don't give the order to withdraw the army, the elves will become sworn enemies with the Roth Empire," Helena said resolutely to Andre. "You should tell this to the colossal dragon tribe. We only want half of the territory that they don't need. If they really had the slightest bit of determination to form an alliance with you and fight against the demons together, they wouldn't be so stingy on such matters." Andre sneered. "As long as we get the territory, We will immediately withdraw from the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest. Don't even think about threatening the giant dragon race. You will regret it." Isaiah glared at Andre. "I've only ever done my job. I don't waste my breath arguing." Andre looked at Isaiah calmly. "Your giant dragon tribe is the one who caused the elves and beastmen to fall to this state." "Oomph." Helena left in a huff. Right now, she needed to return to the Wind Forest to take charge of the defense and expel all the invaders from the Wind Forest. The crisis that the elves were facing right now was comparable to the crisis that had occurred during the war between species. "Andre, we beastmen will let you taste the bitter fruit of our invasion." Oster also left hurriedly with his 5 10th tier powerhouses. Many of the orc tribes under his control had already fallen. Without a 10th tier powerhouse to guard and command, the orc tribes would be destroyed with just a touch. "Andre, you'd better consider whether you want to have a long and drawn-out war with the orcs." Lex stood up and looked at Andre with a deep gaze. Then she looked at the representatives and the chiefs of the various tribes and said, "Everyone, now is the time to test whether the Peace Alliance is a stable organization and not a paper tiger. The 108 tribes of the orc race need your support." Meg stood up and calmly said, "I will go to the Twilight Forest with you all." "We will go too." Dexter also stood up with a firm tone. Michael also stood up with a solemn expression and said, "As a member of the Peace Alliance, Chaos City will stand firmly on the orc side and maintain world peace. The goblins are willing to send an elite troop to reinforce the Twilight Forest," the goblin chief said. "The dwarves will provide the Alliance with the best weapons and equipment, as well as stable supplies and fortifications," the king of the dwarves said in a low voice. "Andre, I order you all to leave the Twilight Forest immediately. Otherwise, the giant dragons will attack the Roth Empire," Lewis said to Andre in a low voice. The members of the Peace Alliance expressed their stance one after another. The War Alliance against the Roth Empire had already been formed. Sean and the powerhouses of the Roth Empire had a slight change in expression. Obviously, they didn't expect the situation to take a turn for the worse. It was going in a direction that no one wanted to see. The demons and forest trolls were just watching from the sidelines. They were just there to watch the show. "Threats are useless to me. Even if all of you attack together, the Roth Empire can still wipe out 2 or 3 of your tribes and destroy half of the giant dragons." Andre didn't avoid or retreat. He looked straight at Lewis. "I wonder if all of you are ready to pay such a price. After paying such a price, are you still able to fight that devil? I will give all of you 3 days to think about it. Come and talk to me again after you have made up your mind." Andre stood up and strode towards the door. The powerhouses of the Roth Empire stood guard around him as they followed him with wary expressions. "Aren't you worried that you won't be able to walk out of this door?" Meg's voice sounded from behind. "Since I can take down the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest here, what's the use of keeping me here other than making the Empire's cavalry even crazier?" Andre stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at Alex with a mischievous smile. "Alex, you should know very well how scary the crazy Empire's cavalry is. If you keep me here, Chaos City will be gone. You will push the Roth Empire into the endless abyss for your own selfish desires," Meg said with a frown. "Humans climbed up step by step from the abyss. We're not afraid of going back into the abyss, but we will be the final victors." Andre looked deeply at Meg before turning to leave. Although there were dozens of 10th tier powerhouses sitting in the hall, none of them made a move in the end. Meg retracted his gaze and said to Connie, "Let's go. I will go to the Twilight Forest with all of you." "Okay." Connie quickly nodded. Of course, he couldn't reject such a top superstar. "I will make a trip to the Wind Forest," Irina said in Meg's ear. Golden light lit up under her feet, and she disappeared from the hall in the blink of an eye. "I hope everyone can fulfill their promise." Meg glanced at the various powerhouses present and went out with Connie and Rex. Dexter got up and followed them out. Chapter 1954. Big Brother. The Roth Empire's army is coming from the east. They're only about 25 kilometers away from our tribe. The Sela tribe has already been breached and burned. Many people must have died. Haebang ran up the stone wall with sweat all over his forehead. He looked at Haega, who was looking into the distance, and angrily said, "They've gone too far. Let's fight them. Don't be impatient. Pass down my orders. Send all the bows and arrows in the tribe to the city wall. Get the best hunters to go to the city wall and get the others to carry rocks up," Haega calmly ordered. The Crow tribe was located in the middle of the twilight forest. The tribe was built halfway up a mountain, with a steep peak at its back and steep cliffs on both sides. Only the front of the tribe had a rugged mountain path that led down the mountain. It was not suitable for large groups to pass through. Furthermore, they had built a 5-meter-tall stone wall on this side. As a medium-sized tribe, the Crow tribe had more than 5,000 orcs. Apart from the elderly and children, there were more than 3,000 of them who could fight. In the orc tribe, the women's fighting ability was never inferior to the men's. As the eldest son of the chief, Haega was the expected next chief of the Wu-Tuo tribe. He had already taken over the various affairs of the tribe under his father's guidance, and was currently the actual ruler of the Wu-Tuo tribe. This was also the reason why the two brothers had not gone to Amy's for a long time. Recently, the factions of Oster and Connie in the Twilight Forest were in conflict. The factions of War and Peace were at loggerheads. As the leader of the Crow tribe, Haega had to stay in the tribe to deal with any possible incidents. The Crow tribe chose to stand on the side of peace. As a small and medium-sized tribe, peace had brought stability to the Crow tribe, and they would not repeat the mistake of being cannon fodder. A few days ago, Connie had sent a messenger to deliver a secret letter to them, warning them to be careful of the Roth Empire's attack. Haega then recalled all the orcs in the tribe and canceled all hunting activities. He left the most elite and powerful hunters in the tribe to protect the tribe. Haebang had not cared about this at first. He thought that the Roth Empire would not attack the orcs before the peace conference ended, much less attack the Crow tribe in the middle of the Twilight Forest. In the past few years, the orc tribes at the borders have been fighting with the Roth Empire's border army. They had even pillaged the Roth Empire's villages and towns, but the Roth Empire had never dared to attack the Twilight Forest. However, no one would have thought that the Roth Empire would launch a sudden attack on the Twilight Forest on the first day of the peace talks. Furthermore, they destroyed several large tribes at the border with ease. They were like a sharp knife that pierced into the Twilight Forest and slashed downwards rapidly, as if they were going to split the entire forest into two. Coincidentally, the Uddo tribe was in the path of an invading Roth Empire cavalry, and the Sela tribe in front of them had already been conquered. It was a medium-sized tribe with more than 10,000 beastmen, and it was even more powerful than the Wu-Tuo tribe. However, it had only been an hour since they had been attacked, broken through, and abandoned. The Roth Empire's cavalry was like a swarm of locusts. After destroying one tribe, they immediately rushed to the next target. The Crow-Tuo tribe had nowhere to run. As proud beastmen, they naturally would not surrender. An old orc that was old, but still muscular walked up to the city wall. "Father." Haha looked at Tysil as he took 2 steps forward and said, "The Sela tribe has already been conquered. The Roth Empire's army is coming straight for us. I have already asked the Fok tribe for help. We plan to defend based on the terrain advantage and wait for the reinforcements to arrive." "I have already heard from Haebang." Tysil nodded as he looked at his calm son with gratification. If he were Haha's age, he would have rashly led the tribe's warriors down the mountain to fight the Roth Empire's army to the death. Haha walked closer to Tysil and lowered his voice as he said, "The enemy is very strong. They are much stronger than we expected." Tysil looked into Haha's eyes and said, "It is not scary that the enemy is strong. As long as we have the will to fight, we will be able to defeat all enemies." Haha nodded solemnly with high fighting spirit in his eyes. Over 10 trebuchets were already in place. The huge rocks that were splashed with beast oil were glowing under the sun as they were aimed at the sky. The tribe's best hunters were standing on the city wall with longbows in their hands. They were the best marksmen in the tribe. The orcs lined up to carry the huge rocks up the city wall one by one and piled them up into small hills. The ancestors of the Wu-Tuo tribe had already proven this countless times. Standing on a high city wall and relying on the mountainous terrain, The huge rocks pushed down by the children were more troublesome than the arrows shot by the marksmen. Not long after, the ground began to tremble slightly. Shouts and the sound of horses' hooves could be heard from the canyon far away. "Prepare for battle," Haha roared as he stood on the city wall. He took out the huge bow on his back and knocked a spear-like arrow on the bowstring, aiming it at the canyon below. Thousands of archers also knocked their arrows on their bowstrings at the same time and stared in the direction of the canyon. The orcs beside the trebuchets looked at Haha, waiting for his orders. Below the city wall, thousands of orcs were holding big knives, stone clubs, and javelins, waiting in formation. Further back were the children and elderly. They were also looking in the direction of the city wall with serious expressions and did not show any fear. The first thing that appeared in the vision of the Wu Tuo tribe was the hundreds of flying cavalrymen. They flew towards the Wu Tuo tribe in a black mass. The wingspan of an eagle mount was usually 3 to 5 meters. Other than a pair of sharp claws, it did not have any other special abilities. Its speed, agility, and strength were not considered strong among the first-tier magic beasts, and it could only carry one person. However, it was a first-tier magic beast that was very easy to tame, so it was one of the most popular flying mounts in the Roth Empire's army. Every army had their own flying eagle squadron. The power of the knights was at least 4th tier. Whether it was diving, stabbing, or directly landing in the enemy's camp, they could cause a lot of trouble. It's just a small tribe. Brothers, let's take them down directly so that our brothers below don't have to climb a mountain. The leader of this flying eagle squadron was Barrow, a tall, middle-aged man. He looked at the Wu Tuo tribe that was halfway up the mountain and laughed with disdain. "Kill!" There was a burst of laughter from the flying group. Ever since they entered the Twilight Forest, they had not met any effective resistance. Even they were a little surprised that these strong-looking orcs were so weak. The last orc tribe that they had wiped out was much bigger than this one, but their flying eagle squadron only needed to dive a few times to break the will of that tribe. Together with the Empire's cavalry, that tribe was quickly flattened. This tribe looked even more vulnerable. The cavalrymen on the backs of the eagles had sinister smiles on their faces. They were already thinking about how they could choose a few beautiful female orcs to enjoy before the cavalrymen arrived. 500 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. Release. A thunderous roar was heard. Whistling fireballs and a sky full of arrows suddenly flew from the top of the city wall and flew towards the flying eagle squadron that was diving down. Chapter 1955. The fireball dragged a long tail behind it, and the arrows were coated in green poison. When the steelback eagles were less than 100 meters away, the fireball met them head-on. "Kill!" Barrow drew his sword and looked at the rain of arrows. Although he was a little afraid, retreating now would only make him a target. Furthermore, the glory of an imperial knight made it impossible for him to retreat on the battlefield. "Kill!" All the knights drew their swords and roared in unison. Bang! When the fireball hit the steel riding eagle, it directly smashed a bloody hole in the body of the steel riding eagle. Together with the steel riding eagle, the steel riding eagle fell from the sky and was badly mutilated. Puff, puff, puff. The poisoned arrows pierced the eyes and bodies of the steelback eagles. The hundreds of large steelback eagles became the best targets in the sky. In the blink of an eye, the menacing steelback eagles fell from the sky like dumplings. Screams. Wails. Wails resounded in the sky above the Utopia tribe. Barrow's heart was bleeding. It was only the first wave of attacks, but because of the unexpected ambush, the flying regiment had lost 2/3 of its members. The knights who had lost their mounts and fell from the sky were dizzy from the fall. Before they could react, they were hacked to death by the orcs that swarmed forward. "Break their formation!" Barrow roared. He led the rest of the flying cavalrymen to charge downwards. The steelback eagles could cover a distance of 30 meters in less than a breath's time. He wanted to slaughter the entire tribe as a sacrifice to his brothers. Spear team. After a round of arrows, Hagar roared as he drew his bow and fired again. Hundreds of strong men holding 5-meter-long spears appear behind the archers. The sharp tips of the spears were pointed at 45 degrees to the sky, facing the steelback flying regiment that had taken the first volley of arrows. Careful! Barrow looked at the silver spears that suddenly rose from the city wall and was shocked. He pulled on the reins to change the flying position of the steelback eagles as he shouted. However, not everyone had Barrow's reaction speed. One by one, the ironback eagles were unable to dodge in time and directly crashed into the slanted spears. The 5-meter-long spear pierced through the ironback eagle's body, skewering it in the night on its back. Blood splattered all over the city wall, creating a bloody and spectacular scene. "Retreat! Retreat!" Barrow shouted in panic as he rode the ironback eagle into the sky. This was the first time they had encountered such a powerful and terrifying counterattack in today's battle. The other party seemed to know their fighting style and used efficient and terrifying methods to deal the greatest amount of damage to them. Although he was a level 7 knight, he only had 20 to 30 subordinates left. Moreover, the other party had orcs of a higher level. Retreating was the only choice, and also the wisest choice. Hundreds of ironback eagle riders charged over, but in the blink of an eye, only a few dozen ironback eagles were left, fleeing in panic. Fire! But at this moment, the second round of attacks from the orcs began. Hundreds of sharpshooters aimed at the 20 to 30 ironback eagles, but in the end, only 3 ironback eagles managed to escape with arrows. They wobbled as they flew towards the valley. The cavalry regiment that rushed out of the canyon just happened to see the flying group of ironback eagles charging towards the orc tribe halfway up the mountain. The expected crushing situation did not happen, but they saw the ironback eagles falling down like dumplings. Then they inexplicably crashed into the city wall, and many of them were nailed to death. In the end, they fled in panic, and only 3 ironback eagles escaped the range of the arrows. How could this be? The cavalry stared with wide eyes, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. In the previous battles where they had attacked other orc tribes, even the larger ones, the ironback eagles had been able to cause a lot of casualties and internal chaos. "We won!" Haybang shouted excitedly, clenching his fists. The other orcs also cheered. This was a battle that was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Utopia tribe. Clean up the battlefield and drag the ironback eagles from the city wall back to the tribe. They're very good food. Haga put down his bow. His expression was still calm. He did not feel smug about the battle that he had just led. This is only the vanguard of the Roth Empire, and only one of the vanguard units. We will be attacked even more fiercely. The number of enemies is very large. I need everyone to stand up and fight to protect our home and our families. Haga shouted, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The orcs clenched their fists and shouted. About 30,000 cavalrymen passed through the valley and headed straight for the Utopia tribe. An entire ironback eagle squadron was almost wiped out. This was a huge insult to the warriors of the Roth Empire. They wanted this tribe, which was only marked as a small dot on the map, to be wiped out forever, just like the other tribes. The catapults were set up again. The archers stroked their longbows as they stood on the city wall and watched the Roth Empire's cavalrymen get closer and closer. The spearmen put their spears aside and stood in front of a pile of huge rocks. Meanwhile, the other orcs had already prepared all the support work below the city wall. This included moving the huge rocks up the city wall, filling in the gaps of their fallen tribesmen, and engaging in close combat after the enemy breached the city wall. "Barrow, what's going on?" A middle-aged general in armor asked Barrow, who had been shot in the shoulder and was receiving treatment from the medics. Barrow's face was pale. Charlie was a deputy general of the Northwestern Allied Army. He was an experienced general and also a powerful 9th-tier knight. This time, the military had suddenly given the order to launch a thunderous operation against the orcs. He was leading an army of 30,000 cavalrymen to attack from middle. Their goal was to break through the entire Twilight Forest and split it apart. As for those orc tribes that had been breached, the order was to kill them all. The orcs were not weak as a whole, but this was because they were united. They had gathered the elites and powerhouses of each tribe in advance to form a powerful orc army. When the orc tribes were fighting on their own, they were unable to withstand a single blow from the large number of well-trained Roth Empire's cavalrymen. However, this small tribe that had been built halfway up the mountain actually wiped out the Ironback Eagle Squadron. This was equivalent to destroying their aerial power. Charlie had to take this seriously. "General, the other party is very cunning. We were ambushed. They came prepared, so we suffered heavy losses." Barrow looked at Charlie with an aggrieved expression. Tears were already welling up in his eyes. Chapter 1956. Father, why did we suddenly attack the orcs and elves at the same time? Sean asked perplexedly as he followed Andre to the flying steed. Andre's face darkened, and he softly said, "I also want to know who dared to mobilize the army behind my back." "Didn't you give the order?" Sean's expression changed slightly. Andre had absolute control over the Roth Empire's army, and the Empire's marshal was right beside him. If it wasn't Andre who gave the order, who could mobilize the northwestern and southeastern military regions at the same time? "Could it be Josh?" Sean exclaimed. "It's not him." Andre denied Sean's guess almost immediately. "If the Magus Tower controls Rodu, it might have something to do with him. No one else can mobilize the two major military regions apart from me. I'm just guessing. I hope Father doesn't blame me. After all, the only person in Rodu who has the power to do something like this is Josh, and we happen to be in Chaos City." Sean quickly lowered his head. Andre's face darkened when he heard that. He turned to the official beside him and asked, "Is there any news from Rodu?" "Your Majesty, everything is normal in Rodu. There are no abnormalities," that official replied respectfully. "Did Josh send a message?" Andre asked again. "His Highness the Second Prince didn't send a message, but news from Rodu says that he is commanding and maintaining order in Rodu." Andre nodded slightly and continued, "Pass down my orders. The Roth Empire has entered a state of war. We will continue to advance according to the original plan. We will return to Rodu first." "Yes," that official replied. "Your Majesty, can I go directly to the Twilight Forest? If there are problems in the military, I will be held responsible." "I hope I can eradicate the problem personally," Dominic said to Andre with a serious expression. The military bypassed him and the Emperor to launch a war against the orcs and elves at the same time. This meant that the Empire's army had gone out of control. As the Empire's marshal, he would be held responsible. He desperately wanted to know who could corrupt the military system and cause such a serious incident. The target this time was the orcs and elves. What if the next target was Rodu? This was something that no ruler could accept. Andre stopped in his tracks and looked at Dominic and said, "I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer." "Yes." Dominic nodded and left quickly. Not long after, a black griffin rose from the city lord's mansion and flew towards the northwest. Following that, flying mounts took off one by one, flying towards the north. "Joshua, you've brought about your own destruction. You've truly surprised me." Sitting on the back of the griffin, Sean sneered. The attack on the beastmen was unrelated to him. It was also not an order from his emperor father. Thus, the only person capable of doing such a thing was Joshua. Even though he was surprised by Joshua's infiltration of the military, and even the northwestern military district under his control had been mobilized by him. As for Josh's motive, he guessed that he wanted to start a war during the peace conference, so that the various races would attack him and Andre. That way, Josh would naturally become the king of the Roth Empire. However, despite all of Joshua's calculations, he was still one step behind. Although the various races were furious, they did not try to force them to stay. The most powerful powerhouses of the Roth Empire had all followed them to Chaos City this time. Anyone who wanted to touch them would have to consider carefully if it was worth it to fight them to the death for an orc. In the Twilight Forest, in a tribe that had just been massacred, between the broken walls, the flames had yet to be extinguished, and the corpses of orcs were everywhere. Joshua stood on a broken wall with his hair disheveled. He closed his eyes and opened his arms wide. Wisps of black fog rose from the corpses around him, and then surged towards him rapidly. They entered his body and formed a ball of black fog around his body, making him look even more blurry. What a delicious resentment, a taste that makes one miss it so much. A greedy and crazy voice sounded in Joshua's heart. His lips curled up into a cold smile. After he had absorbed all the black fog, Joshua suddenly opened his eyes. The heavy fog gradually dispersed, and a smear of red flashed across his eyes. His aura suddenly surged crazily. Joshua clenched his fists and felt a powerful force running amok in his body. This was power, not magic. After absorbing the resentment of the 32 slaughtered tribes, his power began to increase crazily. In terms of power, he should be on par with a 9th tier knight now. As a magic caster, he had directly leaped to the level of a 9th tier knight in just half a day. This made him very happy. There is a huge threshold to go from the 9th tier to the 10th tier. You still need a super large tribe to provide you with resentment. The August tribe with hundreds of thousands of people is a good choice. The devil's voice sounded again. Then, I'll choose the August tribe. Joshua grinned and took out a piece of paper specially used for military secret letters. He wrote 2 lines on it and then stuffed it into the falcon to send to the frontline military headquarters. I've schemed for so many years, and it's all gone now. What a pity. Joshua looked to the east and laughed self-deprecatingly. As long as you can slaughter the entire Twilight Forest and absorb all the resentment, you will be able to transcend and become a real powerhouse, which is also your so-called god. When that time comes, the Roth Empire will be yours. The entire Norland continent will be yours. The devil's voice sounded in Joshua's heart. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame Alex for being too strong. Blame my father for being too biased. If I can't have it, then I will destroy it. Since you like war, then I will help you start one. I want to see who will have the last laugh and sit on the throne. Joshua stopped smiling and turned into a cloud of black fog, disappearing into the forest. A messenger rushed into the tent and reported, "Princess, the 5 lines of defense at the northwestern border have been breached. The Roth Empire's army has already entered the Wind Forest. They are unstoppable." What? In the tent, the elves who were discussing the strategy to retreat from the enemy were all shocked when they heard that. Sally also frowned when she heard that, but she remained calm. She looked at the messenger and asked, "What about the Keynes family, the Radner family, and the Stott family?" The territories of these 3 families were located in the northwestern part of the Wind Forest, which was the route of the Roth Empire's invasion. The Keynes family was breached after a fierce battle. The Radner family and the Stott family had already fled south before the enemy came. The messenger reported. No pop-up window. Chapter 1957. What a bunch of bastards. Sally clenched her fists. These cowards had put the Wind Forest in danger. She then asked the elf beside her, how long more before the guards in the south can retreat? It will take another half a day to get them all back to the core area. That elf quickly replied. Sally frowned. No, that's too slow. Get them to abandon all their supplies and rush back at full speed. Otherwise, the Roth Empire's cavalry would have already flattened the forest by the time they get back. I think we should just surrender. The Roth Empire is too powerful. We are no match for them, Elliot said with a panicked expression. Now that Her Majesty is in seclusion and High Priestess Helena is not in the forest, how are we going to fight the Roth Empire's army when they attack? Yes, the Roth Empire is too powerful. We elves are no match for them. Princess, why don't you go and talk to the Roth Empire? We will surrender and stop fighting. A few other elves chimed in immediately. Many elves were already panicking when they heard that the Roth Empire's cavalry had attacked the forest. Shut up, Sally shouted coldly. Everyone fell silent. All the elves looked at Sally and swallowed their saliva uncontrollably. The Roth Empire's cavalry has just entered the periphery of the Wind Forest, and you are already in a hurry to surrender. We almost occupied the entire forest back then, but we never gave up. It has only been 100 years. Where's your courage? Where's the backbone you had when you defended this forest to the death? Sally looked at the elves coldly with disappointment in her eyes. You have all shed your blood for this forest. Now that the forest needs you again, are you going to give up this time? All the elves lowered their heads in shame and didn't dare to look at Sally. This princess, who usually appeared to be kind and indifferent, was vaguely resembling Irina's aura and shadow at this moment. The Roth Empire used to be our ally, but from the moment they attacked the Wind Forest, they became our enemy. We can no longer retreat. Sally's voice became colder. If you don't want to become the slaves of the Roth Empire, then show the courage you used to chase the orcs and demons out of the forest. Chase these cavaliers out of the Wind Forest. But Elliot still wanted to say something. Sally looked at Elliot and said coldly, "Those who disturb the morale of the troops will be executed immediately." Elliot swallowed the words he was about to say. Although Sally was his daughter, he didn't think she was joking when he saw her cold expression. Drive the humans out. Chase the Roth Empire out of the forest. All of the elves yelled in unison, and the atmosphere in the tent gradually became more and more lively. Everyone seemed to be able to see some of the expressions on each other's faces during the racial war. I just received news that the High Priestess is already on her way back. I will ask Her Majesty the Queen to see if she can come out of seclusion. Sally continued. I will leave the military deployment to Master Denton. He was the military advisor of the elves during the racial war. I don't care what you think, but all decisions will be made by Master Denton. Anyone who disobeys military orders will be executed. An elderly elf stood up slowly and looked at Sally solemnly. We dare not disobey your orders. Thank you. Sally nodded and turned to leave the tent. Phew! After exiting the tent, Sally heaved a long sigh of relief. She turned around to make sure that no one had followed her out, and only then did she use her hand to fan her burning face. She looked at the sweat on her palm, and a wry smile appeared on her face. As expected, she was still far inferior to Irina. If Irina were here, she would definitely do better than her, right? Will she side with the forest this time? Sally looked to the south, and then hurried towards the Tree of Life. It's a mess. It's completely a mess. This might be a good opportunity for us to revolt. That's right. If we revolt during the chaos, we might be able to win over more friends. The opportunity to overthrow the tyrannical regime is here. The leaders of the night elves met again. No, this has to do with the survival of our elven race. The Roth Empire is far more powerful than even the orcs and demons of the past. We can't allow the forest to fall into even greater chaos at a time like this, Snare said with a dark expression. The Wind Forest is now a cage. All the elves have no freedom to speak of. Since that's the case, why don't we just destroy it and rebuild it? Isn't this our wooden floor? An elf looked at Snare with a perplexed expression. Princess Irina once said that no matter how terrible the elven race is, that's our own business. No one else has the right to tell us what to do. Snare shook his head. He looked at the elves and said, I summoned all of you here so urgently to remind you not to have any other ideas at a time like this. Our primary goal is to resist the invasion from the Roth Empire. After chasing the invaders out of the forest, we'll deal with our internal problems. All the elves nodded in agreement in the end. Then, will Princess Irina come back this time? Another elf asked. I think so. Snare nodded with certainty. The Wu-Tuwa tribe had almost wiped out the Roth Empire's flying squadron, and the orcs in the tribe were elated. However, there wasn't much joy on Hage's face. Instead, he looked at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen pouring out of the valley with a grave expression. There was a long line of them, and a rough estimate put them at over 30,000. 30,000 well-trained elite cavalrymen equipped with full body armor. There was also an unknown number of magic casters accompanying them. It was a characteristic of the Roth Empire's army to have a certain ratio of magic casters. This gave the Roth Empire's cavalrymen, who had only one method of attack, more possibilities. Such a large army most likely had magic casters at least at the 8th tier. In fact, there might be more than one. That would pose a huge threat to the Wu-Tuwa tribe. Get ready for battle. The enemy is coming again. Hege turned around to look at his tribesmen. This battle will be very difficult. The tribes that have been breached have all been burned. We have to fight with our lives to protect our tribe and tribesmen. Fight! Fight! The orcs' furious roars reverberated throughout the tribe. The location of this tribe is very important. We have to pass through the canyon in front, and if we don't take down this tribe, they can cut off our supply line at any time. Charlie sat on the back of the horse and looked at the tribe that was built halfway up the mountain. The orcs were boorish and arrogant. They were very careless in choosing the location of their tribe and rarely considered the issue of defense. It was very rare to see a tribe like this one. However, this tribe in front of them, regardless of whether it was to avenge the flying squadron or because of its strategic location, meant that they had to take down this tribe. It's just a small tribe. General, give me 2,000 men. I will go and take it down, a general said confidently. Charlie shook his head, his expression grave as he looked at the tribe halfway up the mountain. In a situation where there are no top experts, to be able to wipe out the Steelback Eagle Flight Squad, there must be some experts in defense in this tribe. We can't waste too much time here. Gather all the magic casters to the front line. I will personally lead the attack. Chapter 1958. What's the exact situation in the Twilight Forest now? Meg asked Connie and Rex after they left the city, Lord's Castle. The Roth Empire's 200,000-strong Northwestern Allied Army has split into 6 groups and launched an attack on the Twilight Forest. All the tribes along the border have fallen, and they have massacred all the tribes that they conquered, Rex said with a grave expression. Did you kill everyone? Meg's face darkened when he heard that. This kind of behavior was even worse than during the racial war. He could not understand why Andre would do that. Killing those innocent orcs would only stir up conflict and the orcs' bloodthirst. It would also arouse the disgust of the other races. There was no benefit in doing so. Yes, Rex nodded. He was also shocked when he received the news. Now, all the orc tribes are fighting for themselves. They are vulnerable in front of the Roth Empire's army. We have to rush back as soon as possible and recruit all the tribes to resist the Roth Empire's invasion. Lantist and I will help you. Meg glanced at Dexter, who had followed him out, and whistled. Ozzy appeared in the sky, circled once, and landed in front of him. I will go to the Twilight Forest to take a look. I can help you stop the Allied army. Meg jumped onto the Griffin's back and said to Connie, before the Allied army of the Peace Alliance arrives, you orcs will have to hold on yourselves. The ground was shaking slightly. This was caused by tens of thousands of cavalrymen marching together. The sound of iron hooves stomping on the ground transmitted a terrifying pressure to the small tribe on the mountain. The joy of wiping out the Ironback Eagles had gradually faded. Hearing the sound of iron hooves approaching from afar, the orcs of the Crow tribe became more and more serious. However, there was almost no fear on their faces. Haga and Habang were like 2 small mountains standing on the city wall, looking down at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen who were marching towards the Crow tribe. The canyon was long and narrow and could only allow 3 or 4 riders to ride side by side. The road to the Crow tribe was even more winding and rugged. It was difficult to even walk on horseback, let alone charge. This terrain was a nightmare for the attackers, but for the defenders, it was a natural barrier. Good heavens, they are really coming for our tribe. There are at least 20 to 30,000 cavalrymen here. These sons of bitches really don't underestimate us at all. Habang spat out a mouthful of saliva and said somewhat angrily, from the moment we killed one of their flying groups, this matter can no longer be settled. Hagar reached out to help him tidy up his armor, then patted him heavily on the shoulder. He smiled and said, Are you scared? I'm not afraid. It's just a pity. I was going to go to Chaos City and buy a few more Rugiamos from Boss Mag in the next few days. When this battle is over, I'll take you out to eat. Haga also laughed. All right. Habang nodded as he looked down at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen in the valley, and suddenly felt less of a headache. The Roth Empire's cavalrymen quickly gathered at the foot of the mountain. Their formation was a safe distance away from the Crow tribe. Standing on the mountain, they could clearly see that the Crow tribe's cavalrymen were gathering quickly, but they could not do much damage to them. On the city wall, the archers and javelin throwers were ready. Behind them were the strong men who were responsible for throwing stones. The Crow tribe did not have any magic casters. Their terrain advantage and strength were their greatest assets. After an hour of confrontation, the assembled Roth Empire's army charged towards the Crow tribe. The cavalrymen led the charge, followed by the archers in formation. More than 10 magic casters in black robes followed closely behind. The 3,000-strong vanguard advanced quickly up the mountain. We have to get rid of those magic casters first. Haga looked at the magic casters in black robes at the back of the army with a grave expression. From the badges on their chests, there was one 8th-tier magic caster and 2 7th-tier magic casters. The rest of the magic casters were between the 5th tier and the 4th tier. On the battlefield, a magic caster's greatest use was not their ability to kill a single person, but to use magic to support the army's movements and influence the entire battle situation. The Roth Empire's army was powerful because they made magic casters a very important part of their military system, and they kept proving that this system was correct in actual battles. The cavalrymen charged, and a 7th-tier magic caster at the back raised his magic wand and began to cast a spell. The originally rugged mountain path began to twist and change. The ground shook, and a slope that was more than 10 meters wide appeared and quickly led to the Crow tribe. The cavalrymen, who were struggling to advance, suddenly sped up and charged up the mountain along the straight slope. Why did the path change? It's an earth-type magic caster. The orcs on the city wall were shocked. The rugged mountain path that could have stopped the enemy from going up the mountain had become a smooth path that led straight to the bottom of the city wall. It was big enough for 6 cavalrymen to charge side by side. "Don't panic. Listen to my orders," Haga shouted. "Archers, get ready." After the panic subsided, the orc archers knocked their bows and aimed at the sky. "Release the arrows." Following Haga's order, hundreds of arrows flew out from the city wall and inside the city, drawing a beautiful parabola as they fell towards the charging cavalrymen. However, just as the rain of arrows was about to land on the cavalrymen's heads, an ice barrier appeared above the cavalrymen's heads. Tuck, tuck, tuck. The arrows made a series of sounds as they hit the ice. Ice shards flew everywhere, but they could not break through the ice barrier. A huge ice block floated above the cavalrymen's heads, and they continued to charge up the mountain. The only 8th-tier magic caster in the magic caster's team was reciting a spell silently. The tip of his magic wand shone faintly as he looked up the mountain with a mocking gaze. The arrows had been blocked. The orcs' faces changed when they saw this. This was their most effective way to kill, but it was blocked by a magic caster's spell. Haebang pulled out his big knife and said angrily, "These cunning fellows only dare to hide in the back. I'll kill them." Haga reached out to stop Haebang and ordered, "Javelins shoot." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Hundreds of javelins that were several meters long were thrown out by the strong orcs. The sharp tips of the javelins glinted coldly under the sunlight. The orcs' powerful strength gave these javelins terrifying speed. Thump, thump, thump. The javelins fell on the ice block with muffled sounds. The sharp tips of the javelins pierced through the ice block, but most of them were stuck in the ice block and did not cause any damage to the cavalrymen below. However, dozens of javelins pierced through the ice block, nailing the cavalrymen and their horses to the mountain path. Dozens of holes of various sizes appeared on the ice block, but it was still firmly suspended in the air above the cavalrymen. "Catapults, fire! Catapults, get ready! Children and elderly, get into the cellar. Everyone else, prepare for battle." Haga calmly gave one order after another, and at the same time, he aimed his bow at the 8th-tier magic caster. Chapter 1959. The flints dragged red tails as they smashed into the ice. Many of them were detonated in midair by the fireballs that flew out from below. A few of the flints that broke through the interception and landed on the ice barrier, instantly smashing a large hole in the thick ice barrier and killing a large number of knights. Most of the orcs' arrows could not break through the ice barrier, so they started to throw boulders when the enemy got closer. Although the orcs were strong, they were not trebuchets. The boulders they threw were blocked by the ice barrier and had little effect. With the magic casters joining the battle, the Utopia tribe, who had the advantage of terrain, fell into a passive position. The ramp was connected to the bottom of the city wall, and the ground below the city wall was still rising. Obviously, the Earth Magic Caster wanted to connect the ramp directly to the top of the city wall so that the knights could charge up the city wall and take it down at a very low cost. Once the city wall was breached, the Utopia tribe would be breached too. The orcs on the city wall all looked pale. This was the first time they had faced the Roth Empire's official army. No one would have thought that the enemy's vanguard of only 3,000 people would make the Utopia tribe so helpless and pathetic. The difference in power and strategy was magnified infinitely at this moment. The vanguard knights advanced steadily. When they were about 200 meters away from the city wall, the ice barrier suddenly disappeared and turned into a translucent light barrier. Immediately after, 1,000 archers drew their bows and shot in the direction of the Utopia tribe. A rain of arrows rained down on the orcs below the city wall. Shield! Haga roared angrily. The orcs all picked up the vine shields beside them. Tuck, tuck, tuck! The arrows landed on the vine shields. Many of them went through the thin vine shields and landed on the orcs' bodies. Screams and groans could be heard from time to time. Taking advantage of the fact that the orcs were busy defending and could not react, the 1,000 knights at the front suddenly sped up and galloped up the slope. The ground below the city wall was rising steadily and was about to connect to the top of the city wall. Swish! Right at this moment, an arrow flew through the crowd of knights and brushed past an archer's ear. It landed on the neck of the Earth Magic Caster, who was chanting loudly with his wand raised. The terrifying force pulled him off his horse and nailed him to the slope. The slope was only 2 meters away from the city wall and could not be raised any further. The knights who were charging the fastest had already reached the city wall. Draw your swords. Kill him. Haga threw away the bow and arrow in his hand, pulled out a large saber that was standing beside him, and chopped off the head of the knight who was charging at the front. The orcs also threw away the shields in their hands, picked up their weapons, and began to kill the knights that had rushed to the bottom of the city wall. The 2-meter-tall city wall was no longer considered a high wall. A few warhorses and corpses could be pieced together to form a step that was large enough to mount a horse. This offensive and defensive battle began to enter the most tragic phase of hand-to-hand combat. The magicians' incantations rang in their ears. Fireballs and icicles rained down on the tribe, killing many orcs who couldn't dodge in time. Haga and Habang were like two gods of slaughter, standing on top of the city wall with broadswords in their hands, stepping on a pile of dead knights. Second echelon, move out and take down this small tribe. We've already wasted too much time here. Charlie coldly looked at the tragic situation on the hillside and ordered. The 3,000 knights charged up the hill again under the lead of a general to assist the vanguard in taking down the Uddo tribe. Although the resistance in this small town was greater than they had expected, this was still a small tribe without any powerhouses guarding it. It was still vulnerable in front of the Empire's powerful army. Charlie flipped through the map in his hands and began to consider the route and target of their next march. The Uddo tribe was in chaos now. The houses were set ablaze by magic fireballs. The orcs tried their best to run toward the city wall while dodging the fireballs and icicles raining down from the sky, and engaged in a life-and-death battle with the knights who had rushed into the tribe. More than half of the city wall had been taken down. Only Haga and Habang were still surrounded by some orc warriors who were fighting a bloody battle. All of them were stained with blood, and the corpses of their tribesmen lay beside them. Despair had already spread. All the orcs knew that they couldn't hold on for much longer. What awaited them was the slaughter of the entire tribe. The Roth Empire's knights were too powerful, and the Uddo tribe was no match for them. They didn't know where the reinforcements were, and no one could save them. The Roth Empire's cavalrymen also saw that victory was within their grasp. Although this tribe was small, they were far more bloodthirsty than the previous tribes. Even though they were completely outmatched, none of the orcs backed down and made them suffer a lot. Habang sent a knight flying with his saber and came to Haga's side. "Brother, bring your men and retreat from the back. I'll hold them off." I'll bring up the rear. You lead your men and retreat. Wait for me." Haga raised his saber to block a knight's sword that was coming at Haebang. His arm was cut by another knight. "I'm not leaving." Haebang cut off that knight's arm with his saber. He glared at Haga with bloodshot eyes. How could he escape now? He was risking his life to bring up the rear. "Let's preserve the Uddo tribe. We can't go extinct like this." Haga pushed Haebang behind him with force and charged toward the general who was commanding the battle with his saber. "Brother." The general also saw Haga. He pointed his sword at Haga and said loudly, "Kill that leader, and you'll be rewarded handsomely." The surrounding knights stared at Haga with bloodshot eyes. They all charged at him with their swords. This was a moving box of gold. Everyone knew that the battle would be over once the orc leader was killed. For the tribe, Haga roared and charged forward with his saber in both hands. For the tribe, all the orcs roared in unison. They attacked the knights one last time with bloodshot eyes. Haebang turned and jumped off the city wall. He ran toward the back of the tribe with tears in his eyes. He wanted to bring the children away and preserve the last spark of the Uddo tribe. Boom! Right at this moment, a sudden clap of thunder came from the horizon. A bolt of silver lightning streaked across the sky and arrived in front of the Uddo tribe in the blink of an eye. It crashed into the crowd of knights. There was a deafening explosion and lightning shot in all directions. Everything within a 10-meter radius was reduced to ashes. All the people and horses within a 10-meter radius were paralyzed by the electric shock. Up and down the hill, the horses were in a frenzy. Everyone was thrown off their feet, and it was chaos. The lightning gradually dissipated, and in the center stood a heavy sword glowing with lightning. "The Tiandu sword," a knight exclaimed. "Awoo!" Right at this moment, a long howl came from the sky. A purple-striped griffin descended from the sky and stopped in the air above the Uddo tribe. On top of the lion vulture, there was a man wearing silver soft armor. That man had finally arrived. Chapter 1960. The intense battlefield seemed to have come to a standstill. Due to the lightning storm, there was a 10-meter wide vacuum outside the city walls. Everyone looked up at the man sitting on the back of the majestic griffin in mid-air with shock on their faces. The Tiandu sword, the purple-striped griffin, and the familiar silver armor all revealed this man's identity. Alex, the godlike man in the hearts of the soldiers of the Roth Empire's northwestern military region. No one would have thought that he would appear here and even attack the knights of the Roth Empire. The Tiandu sword that descended from the sky attracted a terrifying bolt of lightning and instantly turned over 100 knights, including the vanguard general, into ashes. The war horses were all trembling on the ground under the purple-striped griffin's might and didn't dare to move. One man and one sword, and thousands of knights lost their ability to fight in an instant. The knights of the Roth Empire were shocked. Alex's terrifying power had once made the northwestern military region proud, but now that they were standing opposite him, they realized how terrifying it was. The orcs of the Crow tribe were also shocked to see Alex, who had suddenly appeared. Alex's reputation among the orcs was even greater than that of the king of the Roth Empire. This man was invincible. He had once beaten up all the orcs near the borders of the Roth Empire and had never been defeated. Now, this man had appeared again, but his first attack was against the knights of the Roth Empire. Haga kept his saber and slowly retreated. He gathered the orcs on the city walls again and also looked at Alex cautiously. He also didn't understand why Alex would appear here and attack the Roth Empire's army. In the valley below the slope, the knights were also at a loss because of the sudden change. The screams from the mountain had already revealed the identity of the man who had come. He was the god of war in their hearts. Why is Alex here? Charlie's expression was also filled with shock and bewilderment. As a veteran general who had been stationed at the northwestern border for 30 years, he had witnessed Alex's growth. He had risen from a small fry in the border army all the way to the top, and had made countless outstanding military achievements. He had become the god of war in the northwestern border army and the #1 knight on the Norland continent. He had heard about what had happened after that. Alex had been attacked and disappeared in Rodu. There were rumors that he had already died, while there were also rumors that he had disappeared. The Northwest Army was furious and almost caused a mutiny, but it was suppressed later. Those who were close to Alex were purged. As Xiaoan's trusted aide, he had received quite a bit of promotion and had become a general with real power. Just as everyone gradually forgot about Alex, he suddenly appeared again. He was still that invincible knight, but he no longer belonged to the Roth Empire and the Northwestern Army. He had killed experts from various races one after another and stepped onto the path of vengeance. Furthermore, he had even made a move against the first prince and second prince. It seemed that the ambush back then was not as simple as the rumors made it out to be. Today was the first day of the peace conference, and he should be attending the conference in Chaos City. Why did he suddenly appear here? And they even attacked the Roth Empire's cavalry. Charlie's eyelids twitched uncontrollably at the thought that this person whom he had only looked up to in the past had suddenly become his opponent. Even though he had 30,000 cavalrymen under his command, he still did not feel at ease at all. Meg's eyes were burning with fury. He had seen many orc tribes that had been slaughtered along the way. Even the children were not spared. It was hard to imagine that such a tragedy, which was no different from a devil's act, was actually caused by the Roth Empire's cavalry. Meg had thought that the Roth Empire wanted territory before he came, but now it seemed that they were not satisfied with that. He lowered his head to look at the small tribe that was in a tragic state below and found Haga, who was covered in blood, in the crowd. He was a little surprised, but at the same time, he calmed down a little. He did not expect that the first tribe he had rushed to would be Haga and Habang's tribe. Although they had suffered heavy losses, at least they had avoided being wiped out. I am Alex, a cavalry of the Roth Empire. Withdraw from this tribe immediately, Meg said in a low voice. The cavalrymen looked at each other. They had not recovered from the confusion of Alex attacking them, and now he was asking them to withdraw from this tribe that they had taken so much effort to conquer. However, Alex's deterrence was stronger than the entire tribe, and his influence in the northwestern military region was still there. The cavalrymen all withdrew from the Crow tribe and retreated behind the Tion Du sword. Meg glanced at the cavalrymen. As soldiers, it was their duty to obey orders. The decision to attack and massacre a tribe was not something they could influence. His gaze landed on the black-armored general who was surrounded by the cavalrymen in the valley below. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was an old acquaintance. Charlie, the old fox by Sean's side, could be considered an old general in the northwestern military region. Who would have thought that he was the one leading this army? Go down, Meg said. The purple-striped griffin swooped down into the valley. There was a commotion among the cavalrymen in the valley. All the knights and magic casters surrounded Charlie with their swords drawn and looked nervously at the purple-striped griffin that was swooping down. Don't act rashly, Charlie said in a low voice. Looking at the purple-striped griffin that was swooping down, he swallowed hard and tried to remain calm. If Alex wanted to kill someone, they would not be able to stop him. The Crown Prince had lost an arm even under the protection of 6th 10th tier powerhouses. They were a group of 8th and 9th tier knights and magic casters. Any reaction in front of Alex would be a joke. The purple-striped griffin stopped in midair in front of Charlie. Meg looked down at Charlie and said coldly, "Who gave the order to massacre the beastmen?" "Military order," Charlie said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. "Who gave the order?" "This is a military secret. I can't tell you," Charlie said as he looked at Alex. Meg narrowed his eyes, and his aura became colder. "Now, I want all of you to withdraw from the Twilight Forest. I'm sorry, but I can't obey a military order." Charlie shook his head and gripped the sword at his waist. "If you don't withdraw, you will die." Meg's cold voice reverberated throughout the valley. On the mountain, the Tion Du sword that was nailed to the ground flew up and came to Meg's side in the blink of an eye. It was flashing with lightning, showing off its sharpness. "Alex, I know you are very powerful, but you should also know that a soldier's will not change because of any threat," Charlie said coldly to Meg as he pulled out the sword at his waist. He was betting that Alex would not dare to kill him. Just like how he had only severed one arm of the crown prince, even after he had broken through 6 10th-tier powerhouses. Killing him would be equivalent to declaring war with the Roth Empire. Just as he said that, the Tian-Du sword fell. Charlie and his horse were nailed to the ground. Meg looked at the lieutenant standing beside Charlie and coldly said, "According to the Roth Empire's military rules, you are now the commander of this team. Bring all the knights and leave the Twilight Forest." Top point. Chapter 1961. Charlie was dead. The soldiers stared at Charlie, who had been nailed to the ground with a single blow. Their faces were filled with shock. Charlie was a powerful grade 9 knight who had been honed on the battlefield for a long time and had rich battle experience. However, such a powerful knight was so weak in front of Alex. The way he killed him was like a giant accidentally trampling an ant to death. He couldn't even lower his head to take a look. He killed the commander. The beastmen on the mountain also saw this scene and were filled with shock. "He's here to help us." Haga thought for a moment before a hint of joy appeared on his face. "If you don't retreat, I will cut off that mountain and leave all of you here to pay for the lives of those innocent beastmen," Meg said calmly. There were steep mountains on both sides of the canyon. All 30,000 knights were in this canyon. If Alex really cut off the mountain, all of them would be buried. No one would survive. No one doubted whether Alex could cut off the mountain. The upper limit of human strength was meaningless to him. This was not a negotiation. This was an order and a naked threat. Meg saw the hesitation on the lieutenant's face and frowned. He glanced at the Tian-Du sword. "We will immediately retreat from the Twilight Forest," the lieutenant shouted. His voice was trembling as he gave the order to retreat. The rear of the formation became the head of the formation. The knights on the mountain carried the corpses of their comrades and began to retreat. "They're retreating! We survived!" The beastmen of the Utopia tribe cried tears of joy. Some of them picked up their bows, but Haga stopped them. "Treat the wounded. Don't let any more of our tribe die," Haga ordered. Looking at the devastated tribe, this tough man's eyes were already red. Meg put away the Tian-Du sword and watched the cavalry retreat into the canyon. He then rode his griffin back to the Utopia tribe. "Thank you for saving the lives of the Utopia tribe." Haga placed one hand on his chest and bowed to Meg. The other beastmen also put down the things in their hands and bowed deeply to Meg. If he had not appeared in time, the Wu Tuo tribe would have ceased to exist. "No need to thank me. Since the beastmen have joined the Peace Alliance, we are allies. It is only right for us to help you resist your enemies." Meg looked at the many injured people below. The Wu Tuo tribe had suffered heavy casualties in this battle, but the children had all been protected. He waved his hand, and a pile of healing medicine appeared on the ground below. "Take this medicine and treat the injured. I still have to rush to the next place, so I can't stay for long," Meg said as he rode the purple-striped griffin away from the Utopo tribe. "Quick, take these medicines and treat the wounded," Haga hurriedly said. The Beastmen tribe lacked these things the most. Usually, they would just casually get some herbs to treat the injured. The medicine in the tribe was simply not enough for the injured. "Brother, why is he helping us? Isn't he from the Roth Empire?" Hagar climbed up the wall and asked Haga with a perplexed expression. "He should have left the Roth Empire and belongs to the Peace Alliance now. It's right for us to follow the Falk tribe," Haga said thoughtfully. "Ding. The host has prevented the massacre of an entire tribe. You have received 4,000 mission points." A voice sounded in Meg's mind, interrupting his thoughts. "Mission points?" Meg raised his eyebrows. "System, what is this?" Maintaining world peace is a very broad mission, so this mission will use mission points as the measurement of the host's mission completion rate. Please continue to work hard and maintain world peace. The system's voice sounded. Mag looked at the 124,000 mission points that he had accumulated. It seemed that the system had determined that he had earned 120,000 mission points for his argument with Andre during the peace conference. The Wu Tuo tribe had a population of 4,000 to 5,000, and Meg had received 4,000 mission points for stopping the massacre. This meant that one life was equivalent to one mission point. Interesting. Meg pondered and then asked, "But system, what is the final reward for this mission? It can't be just a recipe, right?" "The reward for this mission is based on the number of mission points you receive. The more mission points you have, the better the reward. Anything is possible. Forget it. Anything is possible, and it's not worth looking forward to. In any case, everything that you can offer is within my imagination." Mag rolled his eyes. "Unless you can make me the god of cookery." "Nonsense. This system also has unlimited possibilities," the system said seriously. Meg pursed his lips. He did not want to continue arguing with the system. He got Oz to fly north to find the next army. The Roth Empire and the Orcs had a deep grudge. As the former commander of the Northwestern Allied Army, Alex was familiar with the many plans the Northwestern Allied Army had for conquering the Twilight Forest. This six-way army was one of them, and according to the progress of this army, he could roughly guess the location of the other troops. Although he had only promised Connie and the rest that he would send an army, he still could not control his anger when he saw the massacred tribes. Ding! Emergency! Extremely dense black fog has been detected 80 kilometers northeast. There might be great old ones there. Host, please go and check it out immediately. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded again with a hint of anxiousness. Meg was stunned when he heard that. He immediately got Oz to change direction and fly northwest. At the same time, he asked in his heart, "System, what's going on?" "The current situation is unknown," the system answered. "Is it a coincidence or a conspiracy?" Meg frowned. The northeast direction should have been swept clean by the Roth Empire's cavalry, but the demonic aura of the Great Old Ones appeared there. Meg recalled the terrifying content on the mural. The devil who created chaos and war greedily absorbed the resentment. "I hope it's not what I think it is." Meg's expression turned cold, and he got Oz to speed up. "Danger is approaching quickly. We have to leave this place temporarily." At the same time, Josh, who had just absorbed all the resentment of this medium-sized tribe, licked his lips in satisfaction. The devil's voice sounded in his mind. "What danger?" Josh's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, and he slowly clenched his fists. The increase in power made his heart stronger as well. He was looking for an opponent to test his strength. He was just a little bit away from breaking through to 10th tier. It's the person you don't want to see the most. The current you is still not his match. "Alex." Josh's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Chapter 1962. When Meg rushed to the northeast, he only saw a burning orc tribe. The raging flames had already engulfed the entire tribe. The thick smoke was mixed with the smell of blood that had yet to dissipate, making the flames even more demonic. His ability to sense the black fog was limited. If Irina was here now, she should be able to see some clues, but he didn't feel any special aura. "System, where's that thing?" Meg tried to ask the system for help. "It has already disappeared. The host is late and cannot be tracked for now." The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "Useless." Meg pursed his lips and squinted at the burning orc tribe. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he waved his hand in a certain direction. The Tian-Du sword overturned a stone wall, and at the same time, forced the surrounding flames to disperse. Under that stone wall was the corpse of a male orc. From the wound on his neck, he could tell that he died from the standard longsword of the Roth Empire's knights. However, Meg wasn't concerned about that. Instead, he was concerned about his terrifying withered appearance. All the blood in his body seemed to have been sucked dry, leaving only a skeleton wrapped in skin. This wasn't caused by the flames, because the flames had yet to burn his body. This wasn't something that a knight's sword could cause. "What's going on?" Meg asked with a frown as he looked at the corpse. "It has something to do with the black fog." The system's voice sounded. His target should be the blood essence and resentment of these corpses. So, this great old one had already expected that there would be such a war in the Twilight Forest. And after the war, he crazily absorbed the blood essence and resentment of the corpses to strengthen himself. Meg's frown deepened. Suddenly, a thought flashed across his mind, and he exclaimed, "Or This war was started by him, so the Northwest Border Military received the order to slaughter the orc tribe. The only person who could do this is Josh. Irina had once said that she sensed the presence of the black fog on Josh, but she gave up because she couldn't find any concrete evidence. However, if all of this was planned and executed by Joshua, then it would make perfect sense. Andre and Sean had traveled thousands of kilometers to Chaos City to participate in the peace conference, but they risked being surrounded and attacked the orcs and elves at the same time. That was a very puzzling decision. When the news spread to the scene of the peace conference, Meg clearly saw a flash of astonishment on Andre's face. Now that he thought about it, perhaps even Andre didn't know that such a thing had happened. Andre wasn't stupid enough to anger the entire Norland continent. The Urba tribe's tragedy back then had a huge impact and was unforgettable. However, the Roth Empire's military had already created dozens of similar tragedies in the Twilight Forest. Although Sean had been operating in the Northwest for many years and had deep roots, it was impossible for him to bypass Andre and mobilize the entire Northwest Army to attack the Beastmen, let alone mobilize the Northeast Border Army to attack the Elves. As for how Josh, who had shallow roots in the military, managed to hide from Andre and mobilize two major military regions to launch an invasion, that probably had something to do with the Great Old Ones. What is this fellow trying to do? Meg's expression was a little cold as he clenched his fists and looked around. The sun had already set slowly from the west, and the surroundings were silent. Only the sound of wood burning in the flames could be heard from time to time. If Josh's motive is to absorb the aura of resentment, the host should stop more orcs from dying now. Only then can Josh be stopped, the system said. I suddenly regret that I only cut off one of his ears the last time and didn't chop his head off directly. Meg kept the photo stone and jumped onto the griffin's back. He glanced at the corpse that was slowly being engulfed by the flames and solemnly said, "He won't have another chance next time. When can I appear in front of Alex openly and trample him on the ground?" In a dark valley dozens of kilometers away, Josh walked out of the darkness with a hideous expression. Soon, soon, the devil's whisper sounded in his ears. Big sister, and do you think father and mother have forgotten about us? We haven't even had lunch, and we can't even go through the door. Amy sat on the steps in front of Amy's with her chin in her hands. She turned to look at Anne, and her chubby little face was filled with sadness. Anne smiled and shook her head. She reached out to stroke Amy's head gently to comfort her. But I really want to eat roast goose. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling in her arms and swallowed her saliva. Ugly Duckling, who was lying down peacefully, suddenly widened its eyes and looked at Amy in horror. Then it slowly moved towards and trying to get away from Amy. General Amon looked at the empty castle in front of him and couldn't help but chuckle. The elves are really so weak. They are so weak that I can't even feel that they used to be a race that was stronger than the Roth Empire. As the military commander of this invasion into the Wind Forest, he was a powerful 10th tier knight. He led 50,000 of the Empire's elite cavalrymen straight into the Wind Forest without encountering any large-scale resistance along the way. It was as if he had entered an uninhabited land, and he was able to directly enter the core region of the Wind Forest. This neighbor of the Roth Empire was shockingly weak in terms of combat power and defense. According to this progress, he would be able to lead 50,000 cavalrymen and claim the Wind Forest as the Roth Empire's territory in 3 days without any support from the Empire. Thinking that his name would be engraved in the history books of the Imperium for all eternity, Iman's ferocious face became even more twisted. After passing through this castle, we will march directly to the Tree of Life. Tonight, we will drink the water of life, hug the beautiful elves, and sleep under the Tree of Life. Iman announced loudly. His words instantly caused a round of cheers. The knights who were exhausted from the rapid march were suddenly energized and continued to march with Iman. In the distance, the City of Life, which was built in the forest, could be vaguely seen. That was the symbol of the elves and also the elves' last line of defense. Their unstoppable spirit gradually made these knights arrogant. They thought that as long as they reached the city, it would become the Roth Empire's territory, and the elves wouldn't even have the courage to resist. The City of Life didn't have tall walls, only a seal barrier. At this moment, the nobles in the city were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. Bad news came one after another from the front line. The Roth Empire's cavalrymen were getting closer and closer to the City of Life, but the elves were still unable to retaliate. It was really a headache. Chapter 1963. The elven guards guarding the goblins' border were returning from the south, but it was still unknown when they would reach the Wind Forest. The queen was in seclusion, and High Priestess Helena was still in Chaos City. Now, Sally was the only one in charge of the elves. Sioux elves didn't dare to trust her ability and judgment. There were even elves who snuck out of the city to seek refuge. Report: the Roth Empire's cavalry is still 15 kilometers away from the City of Life, and they are marching quickly. They are estimated to reach the City of Life in an hour. Report: the Vanguard Guards will reach the City of Life in 3 hours. The two pieces of bad news were sent to the discussion tent at the same time, and the gloomy elves looked even worse. See, I told you we can't stop them. The Roth Empire is too powerful. If we surrender and become a vassal state of the Roth Empire, we might still be able to maintain our dignity now, Elliot said with a trembling voice and a pale face. There were only about 5,000 elven guards in the City of Life. Because of the Night Elves incident, the relationship between the elves and the goblins worsened, and most of the troops were stationed at the southern line. With 50,000 Roth Empire's cavalry attacking, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the City of Life was in imminent danger. A pessimistic mood spread in the tent. Elliot is disrupting the morale of my troops. Take him away and lock him up. Sally suddenly ordered. Why you want to arrest me? I am your father. Elliot glared at Sally angrily. The elves looked at each other, not knowing if they should take action. Those who disrupt the morale of my troops should be executed. The enemy is right in front of us, and I am already being merciful by not executing you. Sally looked at Elliot coldly and said in a cold voice, Didn't you hear my order? Two elves immediately went forward and dragged the swearing Elliot out of the tent. Now, is there anyone else who wants to surrender? Sally's cold gaze swept across the elves. All the elves in the tent were stunned and lowered their heads. The little girl wasn't very powerful, but her aura already had a hint of a queen's demeanor. Master Denton, how long can the City of Life last? Sally asked Denton. The other elves also turned to look at the silent, old elf sitting in the corner. Dan Dunn raised his head, his expression solemn. If we only have 5,000 guards, even if we have the advantage in numbers, I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on for more than 2 hours. Not even 2 hours? Sally frowned. The City of Life doesn't have high walls, and the ceiling barrier can only be maximized by the High Priest. The Roth Empire has 50,000 cavalrymen and many magic casters. If they focus their attacks on one point, they will be able to break through the barrier very quickly. 5,000 guards against 50,000 cavalrymen from the Roth Empire. They won't be able to hold out for long. Denton nodded. Why is the defense of the City of Life so weak? Sally was still confused. Princess, you may not know this, but the elves' defense policy has always been biased toward the outer layers, forming a spider web that blocks the enemy outside the City of Life. Therefore, every family has a sizable garrison. But this time, those families at the outer layers retreated without putting up a fight, which is equivalent to exposing the City of Life to the enemy's blade. In a hurry, it is very difficult to form a strong defense, Denton explained. These fellows, Sally clenched her fists. After 100 years of living like royalty, those elven lords had forgotten their mission. When a strong enemy came, they actually fled together, putting the City of Life in danger. I have already sent out a conscription order to the lords around the City of Life. If they come with their troops, it will be faster than the guard from the south, Denton added. Tell them that if they don't send reinforcements, or if they neglect us, they will lose their territories and status forever. We don't need such lords, Sally said coldly to Denton. All right, Denton nodded. He looked at Sally and hesitated for a moment before saying, "There's one more thing. I would like to speak to you in private, Princess." Sally and Denton left the tent. Sally looked at Denton and said, "Please speak. There are hundreds of thousands of elves in the City of Life. If we can get them to join us in defending the city, then we won't have to be afraid of the 50,000 Roth Empire cavalrymen. However, I am worried that the Night Elves will take the opportunity to create trouble," Denton said. The elves were all magic casters. Although there were strong and weak elves, it was not difficult to pick out a few tens of thousands of elves who had the ability to fight among the hundreds of thousands of elves living in the City of Life. Moreover, most of them were veterans who had experienced the racial war 100 years ago. Sally pondered for a while and said to Denton, "The Night Elves are not evil. They're also our people. When the Wind Forest is facing an invasion and is about to be overturned, I believe they will not create trouble on purpose. They are more likely to become our allies to fight against the enemy." Denton looked at Sally with admiration and said, "If that is your judgment, Princess, then please summon the elves in the City of Life immediately and let them join the battle to defend the City of Life. Once the city is breached, any unplanned resistance will be wiped out by the Roth Empire's cavalrymen." "All right, I will go to the Tree of Life immediately to send out the summons. I will leave the matter of arranging the troops to you." Sally nodded and turned to walk towards the Tree of Life. She took a step, and a silver light flashed under her feet, and she disappeared on the spot. Soon, Sally's voice sounded in the City of Life. "Residents of the City of Life, I am Sally. I believe you already know that the Roth Empire has started a war against the Wind Forest. They have invaded our land, killed our brethren, and are rapidly approaching the City of Life. We once regarded them as allies and reliable friends, but now they are stabbing us in the back, trying to put us to death. Now, the elves have reached a critical moment of life and death. 50,000 cavalrymen from the Roth Empire are sharpening their swords and rushing towards the City of Life, while we only have 5,000 guards in the city now. I need your help. The elves need your help. Just like how we chased the invaders out of the Wind Forest 100 years ago. This time, the elves also need you to stand up and stand with the City of Life to chase these bandits out of the Wind Forest." The elves went from panic to calmness. Someone took down a bough that was covered in ash from the wall, carried a quiver, hugged his wife and children, and walked onto the streets. Someone changed out of his luxurious clothes and put on a magician's robe, took out a magic wand, and walked onto the streets. Someone dug out an old armor from under the bed and squeezed his bloated body into it. The crowd gathered on the streets and surged towards the general appointment stage. The veterans donned their armor and defended the city again. Chapter 1964. The 50,000 cavalrymen marched straight in, and soon, the legendary City of Life appeared in the eyes of the Roth Empire soldiers. However, the scene of them raising their flags and surrendering as they had expected didn't happen. Under the bowl-shaped barrier that enveloped the entire city, there were tens of thousands of elven soldiers standing in neat rows. However, apart from the 5,000 elven guards standing in the center, the elves on the sides and at the back were all in a mess of equipment. There were even some who were wearing casual clothes and carrying wands. However, the seemingly messy troop had a sense of cohesion that was hard to ignore. It actually made the Roth Empire's cavalrymen, who were all in neat and orderly formation, feel secretly shocked. Didn't they say that the City of Life only has 5,000 guards? Where did these fellows come from? Amon was also shocked to see the sudden appearance of 30,000 elves. The elves weren't a weak race. The Roth Empire had only caught them off guard. Immerse had to take down the City of Life before the elven guards in the south returned to defend. Only then could he be considered to have achieved something in this war. What he was most worried about was actually Helena returning to the Wind Forest. Then, the elves would be in a state of disunity, and he might have to consider how to lead the Roth Empire's cavalrymen out of the Wind Forest. Along the way, he had seen elves fleeing upon hearing the news. He had thought that the elves in the City of Life would also be in a state of panic and wouldn't have the heart to defend it. However, The current situation also made him a little confused. This was obviously a troop that had been put together at the last minute. Many of them didn't even have proper armor. Even if they did, it was like an antique from 100 years ago and wouldn't fit them at all. However, it was such a hastily put together troop, dressed in all kinds of clothes, that stood together in an orderly manner that gave off a chilling feeling. Imman gave the order to stop advancing, and the two armies faced each other 1,000 meters apart. A bunch of motley crew. General, give me 10,000 men, and I will definitely take down the City of Life. A deputy general stepped forward to request the order. After the other soldiers saw the elves' attire clearly, a contemptuous smile appeared on their faces. The Empire's cavalrymen, who were well equipped, could easily crush this motley crew that had been put together at the last minute. General, let's attack the city. Our scouts have reported that there are still 2 hours before the 10,000 vanguard of the elves' southern garrison will arrive at the City of Life. We don't have much time left. Another general looked at Imman and said. Imman nodded and ordered, Couture will lead 10,000 heavy cavalry and elite mages to attack the city. The rest will enter the city and kill all the elves. Destroy the City of Life and burn the Tree of Life. Yes. Everyone responded in a low voice and began to deploy their troops. The main entrance of the City of Life had a straight road that was 100 meters wide, very suitable for cavalry charges. There were no high walls in the city, only tree walls that were about the height of a person. Heavy cavalry and heavy armor could easily destroy the so-called city walls. The faint golden light shield was faintly visible outside the city. It looked as thin as a bubble, as if it would burst at the slightest touch. On the other side, Barton, who was standing on the high platform, also deployed his troops and assumed a defensive posture. He looked at the veteran soldiers below with a smile on his old face. It was as if he had returned to the days when the smoke of war was everywhere. It was also this group of people who risked their lives to drive the invaders out of the Wind Forest. Soon, Couture led 10,000 heavy cavalry and charged towards the City of Life under the cover of dozens of mages. At the forefront of the troop were 10 heavily armored, bloodthirsty rhinos. As level, 5 magic beasts, bloodthirsty rhinos were violent and bloodthirsty. They also had a terrifying charging force. An adult bloodthirsty rhino could easily knock down thick city walls. Their thick skin and heavy armor made them troublesome meat on the battlefield. They were always successful in attacking cities. Imman directly released these 10 sharp weapons in order to allow Couture to quickly tear a hole in the City of Life's defensive line and take down the city. The 3-meter-tall and 10-meter-long, terrifying beasts ran, causing the ground to shake violently. The ear-piercing roars of the beasts hurt people's eardrums. The 10,000 heavy cavalry followed closely behind the bloodthirsty rhinos. They were like a black flood of steel, surging towards the City of Life. Release the arrows. At the command of the commanding officer, thousands of arrows wrapped in various colors flew out, turning into a rain of arrows that covered the heavy cavalry. The elves are the children of nature. They had a natural affinity with magic. Moreover, their survival in nature had forged their exquisite archery skills. With the addition of magic, the arrows had greater penetrating power and lethality. At this moment, the sound of magic chanting came from behind the heavy cavalry. A level, 10 mage and dozens of other mages conjured a huge protective shield that covered the sky above the heavy cavalry. Skyfire. Fall. Almost at the same time, a level 10 mage standing at the back of the elves shouted coldly. The sky changed color. Huge red meteors fell from the sky, falling towards the heavy cavalry. The sound of magic chanting came from the elf side. All the elements in the sky were thrown into chaos. Fireballs, icicles, windstorms, earth spikes, all kinds of magic covered the sky and covered the earth as they fell towards the charging heavy cavalry. Be careful! The magic casters from the Roth Empire looked at the magic spells coming towards them, and their expressions changed drastically. A huge meteor with a red tail smashed down with a loud rumble. The extremely wide barrier was like a bubble that had been popped. Boom! The meteors landed on the ground with a loud bang. Flames and rocks shot out in all directions, engulfing the heavy cavalry within a radius of tens of meters. The charging formation was broken instantly. The meteors broke the seal, and the magic enchanted arrow rain poured down without any hindrance. The sharp arrows crashed into the heavy cavalry in heavy armor. Other than the thick metal plates on their breastplates, the arrows penetrated almost everywhere else. It was just a round of arrows, and hundreds of heavy cavalry fell off their horses. After the arrow rain, it was a magic storm that filled the sky. Vines and mud walls suddenly burst out from the ground and tripped a large number of heavy cavalry. Thousands of different levels of magic spells rained down at the same time. The heavy cavalry in heavy armor had strong physical resistance, but they couldn't withstand the baptism of magic. Meanwhile, those 10 bloodthirsty rhinoceroses suddenly missed a step when they were 100 meters away from the magic barrier and fell into a huge gully that suddenly appeared in the ground. Soil and rocks quickly filled up the gully. The ground only shook for a while before it became silent. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Emmanuel looked at the heavy cavalry that was engulfed by the magic storm. The horn for retreat sounded, but only the 10 odd magic casters at the back retreated. None of the heavy cavalry could turn their horses around in time. Chapter 1965. The magic storm gradually subsided, and the soldiers of the Roth Empire had never seen thousands of magic casters casting spells at the same time. The younger generation of the elves had never seen it before either. Hence, when they saw the mess on the ground, their faces were filled with shock and fear. 10,000 elite heavy cavalrymen were almost wiped out in this magic storm. Several 10th-tier magic casters, dozens of 8th-tier and 9th-tier magic casters, a group of 7th-tier great magic casters, and countless mid-tier magic casters had cast the most powerful spells they had learned in their lives on this piece of land. However, the so-called motley crew had smiles on their faces now. My youth is back. A bald uncle rubbed his head and laughed mischievously. The surrounding elves also laughed. Yes, the younger elves might not have seen such a scene before, but they had worked together to force the invading demons and orcs out of the Wind Forest. 100 years had passed, and some of them had become nobles in the City of Life, some had become peddlers, and some had become servants of the nobles. No one would have thought that they would be able to stand side by side here today to defend against the invasion of the foreign enemies again. Looking at the clansmen who had once fought side by side with him, their clothes and identities were worlds apart. But in the past, they had all exchanged their lives for this land, this home, for this 100 years of peace. But in the end, they had walked into completely different lives. 100 years had passed, and they were still the ones standing here. This was ridiculous. Many of the elves' eyes flashed with sadness and shame. They were all wiped out. Sally's eyes widened as she looked at the 10,000 heavy cavalrymen who had almost been wiped out in disbelief. These were the most elite heavy cavalrymen in the Roth Empire. She had only hoped that these people who had hurriedly gathered could help the City of Life hold out for these 2 hours until the Elven Guards arrived. So powerful! In the City of Life, the younger elves were also in disbelief when they saw this scene. This is nothing. The orcs and demons were much more difficult to deal with back then, but they were still chased out of the Wind Forest by us. One of the elves who could no longer walk grinned. Don't underestimate this motley crew. They are the real veterans who have been through hundreds of battles. Those little bastards in the guards can't compare to them. Then why did some of them become servants? A young elf asked in confusion. That's the saddest thing. A trace of mockery flashed through the old elf's eyes. The group of people who shed their blood for this forest and this race, the group of people who fought to defend their freedom, lost their freedom in the end, and their freedom was taken away by their own people. But when the crisis came, they still stood up without hesitation. The surrounding elves were silent and fell into deep thought. On the high platform, Barton had tears in his eyes. In the past, he had also stood in this position and commanded the elves to repel the attacks of the orcs and demons. 100 years had passed, and his opponent had become the Roth Empire. He was still standing here, and his warriors were still the same. Damn it, bastard! Imman looked at the heavy cavalry lying on the ground, and his eyes turned red. This was his most precious troop, the elite of the elite. The cost of nurturing a heavy cavalry was almost 3 times that of normal cavalry. This was equivalent to destroying half of his foundation. What was even more detestable was that they died so miserably and didn't even cause any harm or threat to the City of Life. If he had known that the other party had such a large number of powerful magic casters, he wouldn't have been so careless as to send the heavy cavalry to attack first. General, what should we do now? The deputy general who had suggested attacking immediately said with a trembling voice. They had been stationed at the border for many years and were quite familiar with the elven lords at the border. They only felt that the elves were seriously corrupted internally, and that most of them were cowards. And they didn't meet any resistance on their way to the City of Life, which seemed to confirm this point. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that he would fall in the hands of such a motley crew. However, he was also glad. If he had been greedy and fought with Couture for the first credit of attacking the city, he would have been dead by now. Attack the city. Continue to attack the city. I want to see how strong this motley crew is, and if they can really stop the Roth Empire's heavy cavalry. Imman gritted his teeth and raised his hand to summon a few generals and gave them instructions. A long whistle sounded, and a troop of 1,000 steel-backed eagles suddenly appeared in the sky. They split into 2 groups and began to fly around the City of Life. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Arrows flew from below, but because the steel-backed eagles were flying very high, only a few of them fell. The 40,000 heavy cavalry split into 4 groups and surrounded the City of Life. As a veteran general, Imman knew very well that this wasn't a good strategy to attack the city. When the heavy cavalry was wiped out and the enemy's reinforcements were about to arrive, he should be thinking about how to lead the army to retreat and meet up with the reinforcements at the back before discussing the next battle plan. However, the military order he received was to take down the City of Life at all costs and do his best to inflict heavy damage to the elves. He didn't know what the higher-ups' goal was, but he knew very well that this order meant that his troops would have to sacrifice everything for the Empire's interests, including the lives of the soldiers. The magic storm created by thousands of magic casters gathered together was too terrifying. There was no chance of survival within the range of the magic storm, and it couldn't be compensated with human lives. Therefore, he dispersed his troops and, at the same time, forced the enemy to disperse their troops and eliminate the magic storm. Do these fellows really not want to live anymore? They don't even have reinforcements. Barton looked at the enemy troops who had changed their formation with a puzzled expression. However, in the previous attack and defense battle, they had been unprepared and caught the enemy off guard. That was why they were able to wipe out the enemy's heavy cavalry regiment. Now that the enemy had changed their formation, he could only adapt accordingly. However, they only needed to hold on for another hour now. The surrounding lords were rushing over with their troops, and the guard would reach the City of Life in another hour. After receiving the signal of the arrival of the various troops, Imman slowly pulled out the long sword at his waist and shouted, "Take off your shields. Charge towards the City of Life." This time, Imman led the charge. He rode the liger beast forward, and with a leap, he covered more than 10 meters. His speed was so fast that even the best archers of the elves couldn't predict his position. Behind him, the 10,000 heavy cavalry charged towards the City of Life again. 5 groups of troops attacked the City of Life from 5 different directions at the same time. Battle cries shook the sky. At this moment, the Tree of Life in the center of the City of Life suddenly shone brightly. Chapter 1966. Magic and swords clashed, and in the absence of a magic storm, the knights weren't completely defenseless. In the end, the knights still arrived before the magic barrier and began to attack it in a frenzy. The ironback eagles were also attacking the barrier from the sky and converging toward the Tree of Life at the center of the City of Life. Their target was clearly the Tree of Life, the holy tree that symbolized the soul of the elves. Destroying it would destroy the confidence of the elves. The unmanned protective barrier was on the verge of collapse. The elves in the City of Life looked on with concern at the barrier that seemed to be on the verge of shattering at any moment. More and more people walked onto the streets to join in the defense of the city. If we can't even protect the Tree of Life, the elven race will cease to exist. Snare stood on a roof and looked up at the ironback eagles that were attacking the Tree of Life in a frenzy. He leaped down from the roof and flew toward the Tree of Life. At the same time, Sally also turned around and rushed toward the Tree of Life. If the barrier was broken, Barton could command the elves to continue to defend the city, but if the Tree of Life was destroyed, she would become a sinner of the elven race. Pop! A light pop sounded like a bubble being popped. The protective barrier around the City of Life was broken, and the sky was cleared. Both sides were stunned for a moment, and then they entered into a desperate close combat phase. The ironback eagles in the sky were also no longer obstructed, and they ignored the arrows that were flying toward them from the ground as they flew toward the Tree of Life without any hesitation. Their mission was to destroy the Tree of Life, and whoever completed this feat would be made a marquee upon their return. The Tree of Life was several hundred meters tall, and its slender branches glowed with a faint green light. It was mysterious and holy, and its branches swayed gently as if they were alive. Destroy it! The commander of the ironback eagles yelled as he led the charge toward the Tree of Life. No! All of the elves cried out in alarm, and countless arrows shot toward the ironback eagles from different directions. The number of ironback eagles gathered above the Tree of Life was reduced by more than half in an instant. However, there were still several dozen ironback eagles that managed to break through and quickly descended toward the Tree of Life. Pessimism and despair rose in the hearts of the elves. Was the Tree of Life, which had not been destroyed in the racial war, going to be destroyed here? This was the holy tree that communicated with the goddess of life, the source of the water of life, and the spiritual symbol of the elves. The knights raised the swords in their hands, and the iron-backed eagles spread their sharp wings. If they destroyed this tree, they would leave their names in history. Little tree, beat them up. At this moment, a cold voice suddenly sounded. The Tree of Life, which was originally only flickering with a faint green light, suddenly shone brightly. The gently swaying branches suddenly rose up like whips, drawing out blurry cracks in the void, and then fell on the body of the swooping ironback eagle. Pa-pa-pa! A crisp sound resounded through the sky as the gigantic ironback eagle was sent flying by the weak willow branch, crashing into the ground with a loud bang. Like swatting flies, the hundreds of ironback eagles that were dancing wildly in the sky were all sent to the ground in an instant. Together with the knights, they were all dizzy and lost consciousness. A golden light flashed, and a figure in a white dress appeared above the Tree of Life. Her silver hair danced in the wind, and her exquisite and beautiful face had a cold expression. It's Princess Irina. Princess Irina is back. The elves, who had yet to recover from the shock of the Tree of Life's sudden attack, saw Irina suddenly appear and immediately erupted into cheers. The protective barrier had been broken, and the City of Life had fallen into a full-scale battle. The Roth Empire's knights displayed their incomparable strength in close combat and forced the elven allied army to retreat continuously and were about to be utterly defeated. And at this critical moment, Irina appeared in the City of Life and immediately became the savior in the hearts of all the elves. Sally stopped in her tracks and looked at Irina, who had appeared above the Tree of Life with elation on her face. The Tree of Life was fine, and the elves finally had someone they could rely on. Your Highness. Snare also stopped in his tracks and looked at Irina with elation in his eyes. She had indeed come. What was she doing here? However, there were also some elves who looked at Irina with bewilderment. If Irina had summoned the night elves to attack them at this critical moment, It would be one disaster after another. Why is Irina here? Iman was also shocked. He had thought that Helena would come back, but he didn't expect Irina to be the first to arrive. At the same time, he looked around to see if Alex had also come. Irina hovered in the air as she scanned the city of life, which was engulfed in the flames of war. She was astonished at the sight of the elves who had volunteered to defend the city, and her eyes flashed with fury. She raised her magic caster's staff, and holy light lit up the entire city of life. The elven warriors and the knights of the Roth Empire were forcefully separated by the holy light. The branches of the tree of life swayed, and a faint green light gathered above her head, providing her with even more powerful enhancement effects. "Get out of the wind forest immediately," Irina yelled coldly at Iman. Iman looked at Irina with furrowed brows. "General, the vanguard of the guards has arrived. We have to retreat." "There are still 2 elven troops of unknown origins in other directions," a deputy general whispered into his ear. At the same time, 3 flying steeds were quickly flying toward them from a distance. They didn't hide their auras at all, and their identities were revealed. Iman's determination to fight to the death was completely destroyed, and he ordered, "Send the signal, retreat." A red signal flare rose into the sky, and the knights who were attacking the city of life from 4 different directions hurriedly turned their steeds around and retreated. "We won!" The elves' cheers instantly rang out in the air above the city of life, and their faces were brimming with joy. They hugged one another to celebrate this victory, even though their identities were different. This bunch of bastards. Helena's flying steed finally arrived in the air above the city of life, and her face was ashen as she looked at the devastated city. The ones who saved the city of life weren't those lords that you designated, but these ordinary elves. Irina looked at Helena and said with a hint of mockery, "Back then, you all made that laughable policy and threw away the most precious thing to the elves. You may have forgotten, but they didn't, so they stood up again." Helena looked at those ordinary elves who were covered in blood. Elves of different identities and clothes were mixed together, but they seemed so harmonious at this moment. Their smiles were so simple, just like back then. Chapter 1967. The Roth Empire retreated hastily, and the guards arrived. Irina and Helena arrived one after another. Reinforcements from the surrounding lords had also arrived. This inexplicable attack had come to an end. However, the effects it brought would not disappear because of this. Some memories could not be erased easily once they were awakened. "You're right. We chased the orcs and demons out of the wind forest 100 years ago like this. 100 years later, we're still using the same method." Helena looked at the elves who were supporting each other with a complicated expression. Then, she looked up at Irina. "We're not wrong, and they're not wrong either. However, those lords are indeed terrible. I will replace them all. No matter who sits in that position, the result will be the same." Irina sneered. Then, she looked at the elves below. "Besides, when everyone realizes that what you did was wrong, do you think you can continue to maintain this state?" The elves below looked up at Irina and Helena, and then quickly lowered their heads with different expressions. "Your ambition to divide the elves will not succeed." Helena looked at Irina and coldly said, "Now, you should leave this place. If you don't have the ability to protect this forest and these elves, I will come again. At that time, you will see what a real elf should be like." Irina reached out to touch the branch of the tree of life. Golden light flashed under her feet, and she disappeared without a trace. The branch of the tree of life swayed slightly, as if it was bidding farewell to Irina. "I won't be wrong. This is the only way out for the elves." Helena slowly clenched her fists. Barton looked up at Helena and asked, "High Priestess, should we pursue the Roth Empire's cavalry and reclaim our lost land? Please give us your instructions." "Barton, I order you to lead the army in pursuit. Chase all the other races out of the country and reclaim our elven territory." Helena had already regained her tough style and ordered. "Yes." Barton accepted the order and left. "Summon all the lords for a meeting. I have something to discuss with them." Helena said to the elves beside her. After a pause, she said, "Ask Sally to come and find me." "Little boss, why aren't you going in? It's so cold outside." Harrison asked curiously as he held Georgina's hand and looked at Amy and Anne, who were sitting on the steps. "We don't have the key. Father isn't home. We're waiting for him to come home." Amy looked at the two of them holding hands and smiled at Harrison. "Uncle Blue Fatty, is this beautiful lady your daughter?" Georgina covered her mouth and chuckled. Not only was this little girl beautiful, but her mouth was also super sweet. She actually said that she was so young. "Do I look that old?" Harrison was not at all annoyed by Georgina's happy smile, just a little troubled. "That's not it. It's just that you're as old as a few older sisters, so you look like a father." Amy shook her head. "Yes, I feel very safe." Georgina blushed and nodded. She leaned her head against Harrison's chest and smiled. During this period of time, Harrison brought Georgina everywhere to look for food every day. Her face gradually became rosy, and her original skinny state improved a lot. There was more meat on her face, and she regained the aura of a young girl. Harrison smiled honestly. He could not help but want to give Amy a thumbs up for her help. Just then, Cece walked out of the magic potion shop next door and called out to the two, "Little Amy, and come and eat." "Okay." Amy's eyes lit up. She stood up, and her stomach started growling. After saying goodbye to Harrison, she held Anne's hand and went to the magic potion shop. "Mr. Mac is really too much. The two children are at home. Why didn't he tell me? I would have cooked earlier." Cece made a few dishes and put 2 bowls of rice in front of Amy, and she looked at the 2 little fellows with pity. "Father must have been delayed by something. Maybe he want to catch a goose. He said he was going to make roast goose for us," Amy explained with a smile as she took a bite of rice. "You silly child." Cece couldn't help but laugh. She was actually just saying that casually. She didn't need to doubt Boss Mag's sincerity toward the 2 children. If he hadn't been held up by something, he definitely wouldn't have let the 2 children go hungry. Amy tilted her head and looked at Cece's slightly protruding belly and asked curiously, "Big sister Cece, when will the baby in your belly be born?" And also looked at Cece curiously. She was also very interested in the baby in Cece's belly. "It's still early. It's still a very, very small baby now. It will only be born in a few months," Cece said with a smile. Her smile was glowing with motherly love. Amy went forward and touched Cece's belly gently and said, "Baby, you have to be good. When you are born, you can play with your big sisters." And also touched Cece's belly gently with a smile. Meg stopped the 4 Roth Empire's troops that were invading the Twilight Forest one after another. Under the pressure of the Allied forces, they were forced to retreat from the Twilight Forest. The troop that was attacking the August tribe happened to meet Oster, who had just returned to the tribe. Both sides were not easy to deal with. After a fierce battle, they chose to retreat when the other orc tribes came to reinforce them. Another troop went to the Fok tribe and was surrounded by the allied orc forces of over a dozen tribes. All 30,000 of their cavalrymen were killed or captured. However, the retreating Northwestern Alliance army did not retreat to the original border. Instead, they moved the original border 100 kilometers in the direction of the Twilight Forest and set up camp there. The backup supply lines had already been opened and followed up. "Where is Joshua hiding?" Meg rode the griffin and circled above the massacred tribes in the Twilight Forest, but he could not find any traces of Josh. The system also did not give any feedback. How to deal with the aftermath was the orcs and the Roth Empire's problem. What he was more concerned about now was that Josh might have already sold his soul to the Great Old One. Was this Great Old One who controlled Josh related to the missing Great Old One under Dragon Island? After instigating the war between the 3 races, did Josh really become stronger after absorbing the resentment and blood essence of these dead orcs? He's a ruthless person. Meg still chose to give up in the end and gave Josh an evaluation. To be able to give up the throne and his identity as the Empire's second prince and become the devil's puppet without hesitation, what else would such a person not do? It's over. I forgot about Amy and Anne's dinner. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch instinctively. Suddenly, he slapped his head and anxiously said, "Ozzy, let's go back." Chapter 1968. When Meg returned to Chaos City, the sky was already dark. He told Ozzy to go back to her nest at the textile factory. After changing his clothes, Meg pushed his bicycle out of the alley and bumped into an auntie who was carrying 2 pots. "Mr. Meg!" the auntie exclaimed in surprise when she saw Meg. Meg stared at Rebecca, who was wearing the uniform of a hot pot employee. He was a little surprised and asked, "Madam Rebecca, what are you doing here?" "The child hasn't had much of an appetite for the past 2 days, so I went to East 2nd Street to buy her 2 pots of Auntie Tao's chili sauce. This chili sauce is very fragrant and delicious. It can be mixed with rice and noodles. Also, they recently got 2 round animals to put at the door to attract customers. I heard they're called penguins," Rebecca said with a smile as she waved the 2 pots of chili sauce in her hands. "I see. That's pretty good." Meg looked at the huge pots of chili sauce in her hands. He didn't expect there to be people in Chaos City who specialized in making chili sauce. "Oh yes, take 1 pot back. Amy will definitely like this. The last time she came to my house, she ate 3 bowls of rice with this chili sauce." Rebecca put one of the pots of chili sauce into Meg's bicycle basket. She smiled at Meg and said, "Jessica said she wants to go and play with Amy in a few days' time. I've been busy with work these past few days, so I didn't have time to bring her over." 3 bowls of chili sauce wasn't enough for other people, but 3 bowls of chili sauce wasn't enough for Amy. Hence, Meg felt that Rebecca was telling the truth. Excluding the fact that Amy was very hungry at that time, this chili sauce should be pretty good. Meg also hadn't eaten pure chili sauce for a long time. He didn't want to reject Rebecca's kindness, so he smiled and said, "All right, thank you. You can bring Jessica over when you go to work tomorrow. Amy hasn't been going to school for the past few days, so the children can play together." "All right, take care. I have to go back and cook for the children." Rebecca nodded with a smile. "Okay." Meg got on a bicycle, said goodbye to Rebecca, and rode away. When Meg returned to the restaurant, the 2 little fellows were playing with jump boxes at the entrance of the restaurant. Ugly Duckling was squatting at the side, looking at them eagerly. Cece was knitting at the entrance of the magic potion shop. There was a heater by her feet, and she looked up at the 2 children from time to time. When she saw Mr. Mac coming back on his bike, she put down the sweater in her hands and said, "Mr. Mac, you're finally back. The 2 children have been waiting for you the whole day. I went out to look for ingredients today and walked a little far, so I came back late." Meg was a little embarrassed. Cece glanced at the clay pot and a fat duck in Meg's bicycle basket and said, "The children have had lunch, but they insisted on waiting for you to come back for dinner. Hurry up and make them something to eat." "Thank you. I have to trouble you to cook for the 2 children," Meg said gratefully. "Father, you're back." Amy had also discovered Meg. She immediately ran over and jumped into Meg's arms. "Are you hungry?" Meg hugged Amy and looked at her with a doting smile. I'm hungry." Amy nodded honestly, and her stomach began to grumble as well. She looked at the fat goose in the bicycle basket, and her eyes lit up immediately. "Can we eat roast goose tonight?" "Yes, Father will make roast goose for you tonight." Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at Anne, who was also smiling, and reached out to pat her head. I must be hungry too. Let's go home. I'll cook for you," and nodded. Her eyes narrowed into crescents as she smiled. Meg opened the door and went in. He had already decided to give Amy and 2 sets of keys later. This way, even if he wasn't home, the 2 children could go home by themselves and wouldn't have to wait pitifully outside. "System, you're not very smart at all," Meg criticized in his mind. "The system has no obligation to take care of the host's children, nor do I have the authority to open the door," the system retorted. Amy followed behind Meg with her little hands behind her back. She scrutinized Meg like a little adult. "Father, why did you and Mother go out the whole day? Did you go on a secret date and forget about us?" And also looked at Meg. Meg was a little embarrassed. Today's matter was urgent, and he had indeed forgotten to go home and cook. "That's right. I've been looking for him all day. I was just wondering who he went on a secret date with." Just then, a teasing voice sounded. Irina appeared in the dining room and looked at Meg with a smile. Is that really the case? Amy looked at Meg, and then at Irina. Meg spread his hands. This is really unfair. Unfair? Amy blinked and pointed at the big fat goose that stuck its head out of the basket. Is that it? No, it's a penguin. Meg smiled. Looking at Irina's expression, the wind forest shouldn't be a big problem. He parked the bicycle. Wait here for a while. I'll go wash up and change my clothes. Then I'll come down and cook for you. I'm going to wash up too. Irina walked towards the stairs. Together? Meg asked without thinking. There's a private bathroom in my room. Irina looked at Meg and gave him a mysterious smile. Then she went upstairs. What's the meaning of that smile? Meg raised his eyebrows and followed her upstairs. Meg took a shower and quickly changed into a chef suit before coming downstairs. When he carried the big fat goose, Meg took out the bottle of chili sauce and said to Amy, Aunt Rebecca asked me to bring you this chili sauce. She said you like it, and Jessica will come and play with you tomorrow. I love this chili sauce. It's super delicious. Amy went up and hugged the big jar of chili sauce. She said happily, this is great. I haven't played with Jessica in a long time. Meg carried the fat goose into the kitchen. It was a baby goose that was a cross between a black-haired goose and a wild goose. It was only 3 months old, but it was very plump and tender. It was a high-quality goose, specially bred by the system to make roast goose. Roast goose was different from roast duck. This difference was reflected in the handling of the ingredients, cooking methods, and eating methods. Bleeding the goose, plucking its feathers, cutting off its feet and the tips of its wings, removing its innards from its tail, and blowing to separate its skin and flesh. Meg had already developed muscle memory for these steps in the test field for the God of Cookery. To make a top-notch roast goose, it was an out-and-out technical work. After putting the roast goose covered in a layer of syrup into the oven, Meg breathed a sigh of relief. It was his first time making roast goose in a real kitchen. He was still a little nervous about whether he could produce a perfect roast goose. While waiting for the roast goose to be cooked, Meg made a few more dishes. When the oven beeped, Meg had already prepared a table full of dishes. He opened the oven and took out the roast goose, which was golden red in color. A rich aroma wafted out. Gulp! The 3 people standing at the kitchen door swallowed at almost the same time. Peek! Chapter 1969. The freshly cooked roast goose was golden with a hint of red in the middle. The color was exceptionally bright, and a strong aroma wafted through the air. Meg held the roast goose with one hand and nodded with satisfaction. The color and appearance were perfect, and the aroma was authentic. It was the best roast goose. This color, I love it, Irina exclaimed. It looks better than the roast goose from the roast goose shop on the street. Amy nodded her head and stared at the roast goose in Meg's hand. Meg smiled as he removed the needle from the roast goose and poured the gravy from the roast goose into a small bowl. This was the essence of the roast goose. The strong aroma of the spices came from it, and it still had important uses. Compared to the finely sliced roast duck, the roast goose was much simpler. He took the fathead fish, put the roast goose on a clean chopping board, and chopped it into even pieces. Then he directly put on a plate. At this time, he poured the gravy evenly on the cut roast goose and let the gravy soak into the meat. Then he could serve it. Of course, the sour plum sauce was indispensable to eat the roast goose. The sour plum sauce was provided by the system. Meg made 4 of them, carried the roast goose out of the kitchen, and said, "All the dishes are ready. Let's eat. My chopsticks are ready." Amy sat on the chair and stared at the roast goose in Meg's hand. You can eat it directly, or you can dip it in the sour plum sauce. You can choose the taste, Meg said with a smile as he put the roast goose in the middle of the table. Okay. Amy nodded and reached out with her chopsticks to pick up a duck leg and put it in Meg's bowl. "Father, you work hard. This duck leg is your reward." "Rewarding me with the roast goose leg I made? Is this okay?" Meg looked at the duck leg in the bowl, but the smile on his face had already exposed his inner feelings. "So good. My baby daughter knows how to care for him." Thinking of this, He glanced at Irina proudly. Mother, thank you for your hard work. This big duck leg is for you. Amy then picked up a duck leg that was even bigger than the one Meg gave to Irina. Meg's smile froze. Thank you. Xiaomi. Irina looked at Meg with a smile. She picked up the duck leg, dipped it in the sour plum sauce, and put it into her mouth to take a bite. Ugh. The sweet and sour taste of the sour plum sauce instantly activated his taste buds, which had been running around for the whole day and had barely eaten anything. The crispy and fragrant goose skin, the tender and plump goose meat, and the thick fragrance of the goose meat all blossomed in this mouthful. The goose meat absorbed the gravy and became tender and juicy. With a slight chew, the skin and flesh separated. The more one chewed, the more fragrant the meat became. When dipped in the sour plum sauce, it had a unique flavor. Irina seemed to see a big fat goose spreading its wings and about to take flight. She saw the vast sky, and she saw after a long time, Irina opened her eyes and took a deep breath. She looked at Meg and said seriously, "You can't escape from me in this lifetime. Even if you have my woman, your heart is also hers," Amy added on for him. That's right. Meg nodded. The corners of his mouth curled up with a hint of smugness. Sure enough, conquering a woman starts with conquering her stomach. Amy also picked up a duck leg for her, and then she picked up the last duck leg, dipped it in the sour plum sauce, and took a bite. Her blue eyes lit up instantly. Her little mouth moved quickly, and she quickly swallowed the goose meat in her mouth. Before she could say anything, she took another big bite of the goose meat. Her cheeks were puffed up, and she chewed very happily. Her face was full of bliss, and she looked very appetizing. He couldn't help but want to swallow his saliva. Meg felt that Amy must have clicked on Mew boasting talent. She could always make people hungry. So roast goose is really super delicious. I love roast goose. Amy finally found the time to say this after she finished half of the goose leg. She didn't forget to turn a look at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling, you have to eat more too. Grow up quickly. Ugly Duckling, who was focused on eating a piece of goose meat, stopped. The goose meat in its mouth suddenly didn't taste good, and was eating the roast goose leg in small bites. Judging from her excited expression, she should like this roast goose very much too. Meg wasn't in a hurry to eat the goose leg. Instead, he picked up a piece of breast meat and put it into his mouth directly without dipping it in the sour plum sauce. The breast meat had skin, meat, and bones. An excellent roast goose had to have many excellent qualities. The skin was crispy and fragrant, and the crispy water, made with malt sugar, gave it a hint of sweetness when chewed. The skin, meat, and bones seemed to be tightly connected, but they separated easily once it entered the mouth. The gravy had already seeped into the bones. Chewing together with the skin and bones, the more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. The taste of the plump and tender goose meat was just right. It was fat, but not greasy. Yes, this is a perfect roast goose. Meg swallowed the goose meat in his mouth and nodded with satisfaction. As a senior foodie, roast goose was a famous dish with a very high status in Cantonese cuisine. He had tasted many famous dishes and also complained about many of them. However, there had never been a roast goose made by a famous chef that gave him such a delicious experience. It's too good. I'm almost mesmerized by myself. Meg sighed. This was really embarrassing. However, since he had achieved this step, he was worthy of the roast goose recipe that gathered all the master's lifelong knowledge. Dinner ended happily. The two children brought Ugly Duckling upstairs to play while Meg started to clear the table. How's the situation over at the orc side? Irina asked Meg as she helped to clear the chopsticks. The Roth Empire created dozens of tragedies in the Urba tribe among the orcs. Many tribes were directly massacred. Even the children were not spared. Meg's expression was a little grave. Andre, that old bastard, isn't he afraid of angering the masses? Irina said angrily and confusedly with a raised brow. It's possible that it wasn't Andre's order. Meg shook his head. I found the existence of a strange black fog in one of the massacred tribes, and I also saw this. Meg took out a photo stone and showed Irina the corpse of the orc whose blood essence had been sucked dry. This is, I suspect that Josh, who sold his soul to the devil, started a war against the orcs and elves behind Andre's back, and gave the order to massacre the orc tribes. Meanwhile, he relied on absorbing the resentment and blood essence of these dead orcs to increase his power. You sense the existence of the black fog on his body previously. He should have already come into contact with the Great Old One at that time, Meg said. If that's the case, we have to find him as soon as possible and kill him. Irina's expression also became serious. Could he be in Rhoda now? Chapter 1970. Meg wasn't sure if Josh would be in Rodu, but he knew that Andre should be having a headache right now. The crimes committed by the Roth Empire's army in the Twilight Forest would definitely cause a huge uproar among the various races. It would force the Peace Alliance, which wasn't firm enough to stand on the same side. The orcs and elves, who were rather powerful, lost more than half of their territories in just one day. Dozens of their tribes were even massacred. If the Roth Empire's big stick landed on the dwarves or goblins, it would definitely be a disaster that would wipe out their entire race. The members of the Peace Alliance had to work even more closely because of the Roth Empire's threat. They would treat the Roth Empire as their #1 enemy. Although the Roth Empire was powerful, Andre's original plan was to form an alliance with the Forest Trolls, rope in the elves, and maintain a certain level of harmony with the giant dragons before expanding. If Josh was in Rhoda now, the first person to deal with him would be Andre. Rodu, Royal Study. Bastard. Andre threw the urgent military report in his hand and sternly said, "Surround the military headquarters. Arrest everyone involved and interrogate them in the prison. Get Dominic to come back and see me immediately." Yes. The officer received the order and left quickly. All the officials in the royal study lowered their heads and didn't dare to say anything. The Empire's army had been mobilized without His Majesty's orders. Furthermore, they were mobilizing troops against the orcs and elves at the same time. This was a huge matter. The army losing control was something that His Majesty couldn't tolerate. This meant that there could be a mutiny at any time, and the Empire could collapse. The officials present also couldn't understand. Who was it that made so many people risk their lives just to wage war against the orcs and elves? Andre walked out of the royal study and asked his attendant, "Have you found Josh?" "Your Majesty, we haven't found the second prince. Everything in the second prince's residence is normal. No one knows where he is," the attendant quickly replied. "What about the Magus Tower?" Andre frowned. The Magus Tower said that the second prince went to the Magus Tower this morning, but he only went to the library once and left very quickly. However, according to our investigation, the second prince did go to the military headquarters this morning. We are still investigating the people he came into contact with. Find him. I need him to explain some things to me face to face, Andre said with a cold expression. In the Twilight Forest, in front of a slaughtered tribe, the delegation of the Peace Alliance stood silently. "I think we should be prepared for a new race war," Lewis said in a low voice. "Andre is challenging our bottom line. If we tolerate his actions, it means that our Peace Alliance is just a joke," the dwarf representative said angrily. "That's right. We have to make the Roth Empire pay the price for what they have done. Even their ally, the elves, was almost wiped out. They have lost their minds." The goblin representative nodded in agreement. All the representatives were filled with righteous indignation. Apart from being shocked by the Roth Empire's actions of slaughtering the tribes, they all expressed their condemnation. After 100 years of peace, the phrase, "massacring a city," had not appeared on the Norland continent for a long time. And on the first day of the peace conference, the Roth Empire created dozens of massacres in the Twilight Forest. They almost wiped out the entire east side of the Twilight Forest. Their methods were extremely cruel. Roland, the representative of Chaos City, came to the scene and interrupted everyone's discussion. There's still a devil wandering around the human world. According to the scene depicted in the murals, the devil will become stronger through killing. This is something even scarier than this war. The scene fell silent, and everyone's expression became a little grim. What we have to do is to stop the war and not change the way to fight a more tragic war. This is not what the Norland continent needs now, and it might cause another bigger problem, Roland continued. Yes, the most important thing for us now is to find that devil that escaped from the seal and stop the Roth Empire from launching another war. Lewis nodded. He looked at everyone and said, "The giant dragons will send an official notice to the Roth Empire, warning them not to launch another war against the Peace Alliance and asking them to punish the culprits who participated in the massacre. I hope that every member nation can act together to show the Roth Empire our attitude." After coaxing the two little fellows to sleep, Meg went to the city lord's castle that very night. He passed the photo stone to Michael and told him his judgment. "If that's the case, I'm afraid it will be very troublesome. I think Andre will never admit to this. Just the photo stone of a corpse is not very convincing." Michael frowned. After all, Irina didn't find anything wrong with Josh when she used the holy light. It's not important whether Andre admits to it or not. As long as we can confirm that Josh is related to the devil, we might be able to find that devil that escaped from a seal from him. That's enough. Meg's expression was slightly cold. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I will get all the spies to look for Josh's whereabouts." Meg nodded. He chatted with Michael for a while more before taking his leave. The peace conference was forced to stop, and the war restarted. The Norland continent was in a terrible turmoil, and many people were destined to have a sleepless night. However, Chaos City was still as peaceful as ever. People had not realized what might happen, and continued with their original habits. Meg went back to the restaurant, washed up, and went to bed to have a good sleep. The next morning, Meg opened his eyes as soon as the alarm went off. He reached out to turn off the alarm and got out of bed. After standing the customers up for 2 days, Amy should be open for business today. "We'll be launching a new dish at noon today, roast goose." Mag wrote a delicacy notice on the little blackboard and hung it at the restaurant's entrance to appease the customers' negative reviews and grievances. "We're in luck. Seems like we're in for a treat this morning. Mr. Mac is finally opening the restaurant." Harrison saw the line at Amy's entrance from afar and excitedly said to Georgina, who was still sleepy, "Oh." Georgina blinked. "Soy milk and youtiao. It's the perfect combination for breakfast. Add a bowl of tofu pudding, and this breakfast will be complete," Harrison said with a smile. "I like tofu pudding." Georgina's eyes lit up, and her sleepiness disappeared instantly. She pulled Harrison and jogged to Amy's. Tofu pudding was a limited product, and they would not be able to eat it if they were late. "Roast goose? It's rare that Mr. Mac would come up with such a simple name. I wonder how he'll cook it." Of course, he'll cook it in a delicious way. Mr. Mac skipped 2 days of work to create a new dish. There's no need to doubt it at all. He'll be done with it. The customers lining up at the entrance were already discussing. Chapter 1971. Meg stood behind the window and smiled as he watched the customers discussing the roast goose enthusiastically. The best way to appease the complaints of foodies was indeed to give them a new delicacy. Even if it was just a preview, it could make them look forward to it the whole morning. "Father, when will Jessica come?" Amy asked expectantly as she came downstairs in a pretty dress. "Her mother will bring her over when she goes to work. Meg just has to wait at home," Meg said with a smile. "All right," Amy nodded. She picked up Ugly Duckling, which was lying at her feet, and asked, "Then, when can we eat roast goose again?" Ugly Duckling, who was originally sleepy, opened its eyes immediately and looked at Meg and Amy warily, as if it was worried that it would become an ingredient. "If Amy likes it, we can eat roast goose again at noon," Meg said with a smile. He turned his gaze and looked at Ugly Duckling with a smile. "However, we haven't settled on our goose for today. Meow, meow, meow." Ugly Duckling stuck its head out and called out to Meg anxiously, as if it was announcing its identity. Yes, the story says that when spring comes, Ugly Duckling grows wings, flies into the sky, and becomes a white swan. Amy nodded. She looked at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression and said, "Ugly Duckling, spring is coming, and you can fly too." A duck that has been reared for 1,000 days will be stewed in a pot. Just accept your fate. Meow, meow. Ugly ducklings stared at the father and daughter. I may not be a real duck, but you're a real dog. Meg stopped teasing Ugly Duckling and looked at Amy as he asked, All right, what do you want to eat for breakfast? Father will make it for you. I want to eat youtiao. I want to dip it in chili sauce. That chili sauce is delicious, Amy said without hesitation. There's such a way of eating. Meg raised his eyebrows. He had no doubt about Amy's gourmet talent, but the way she ate fried dough sticks with chili sauce really surprised him. He just didn't know how this chili sauce would compare with lao gama. Yes, you can dip it in anything. It's delicious. Amy nodded her little head, fully expressing her love for this spicy sauce. Shortly after the morning service, Rebecca brought Jessica to the restaurant. Rebecca rushed to work at Manna Hot Pot Restaurant after talking to the child. Meg knew that she had waited until the restaurant was closed before sending the child to work. She did not want to cause trouble for him. The children went upstairs to play. Meg made himself a pot of black tea and sat down by the French window. He didn't think too much about the great old ones and the war for now. He could only rely on Chaos City and the various races of the Peace Alliance for information. He checked his faith points and found that it had increased to around 25,000. This was already a rather exaggerated number. One had to know that this was completely based on the replay of the Delicacy Conference to attract fans. He still needed 25,000 faith points to reach the next level. If there were no accidents, he wouldn't be able to complete it by relying on this year's Delicacy Conference. However, the report on Whole Food Mart had yet to be published, and his column had yet to be published. Meg was still looking forward to the spread and influence of words. Since he had nothing to do in the morning, Meg even specially wrote the first draft of his column, Eggplant with Garlic Sauce Recipe, made public for the first time. Eggplant with garlic sauce was Mamie's most famous dish at the moment. Although his main goal was to promote the octopus tentacles, Eggplant with garlic sauce was obviously the best choice in terms of expanding his influence. Writing a draft was a very mentally taxing thing. It took him almost an entire morning to write a short draft, and a few pages were scrapped. Mother, have you found Gaga? No, I've searched everywhere, but I couldn't find Gaga. Don't worry, Zakala. Let's search slowly. We'll definitely find it. A middle-aged lady comforted a young girl with red eyes, looking a little guilty. I can't find it. I can't find it anywhere. Gaga must have been caught and eaten by someone. It's so pitiful. It's just a child. Gaga is so pitiful. Zakala burst into tears on the spot. She looked so pitiful, which attracted the attention of passers-by. Don't cry, don't cry. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have let it walk at the door. I didn't expect someone to take it away. Jeanne Funi wiped her tears with a look of self-blame and said, Let's go and look for it again. Maybe it just flew away. Let's ask more. Maybe someone will see it. Maybe it will come back by itself in a short while. Really? Zakala stopped crying slowly and asked while sobbing. Of course it's true. I know Gaga is very important to you. I will accompany you to find it. Jeanne Funi nodded and sighed silently in her heart. Gaga was a pet goose raised by Zakala. Zakala hatched it from an egg. She treated it like an ancestor, and it was rarer than anything else. It was inconvenient for Zakala to take Gaga with her when she went out today, so she asked Jeanne Funi to look after Gaga for her. Jeanne Funi ran a big breakfast shop in Aden Square. When she was busy, she forgot about Gaga. She just asked the waiter to let Gaga walk at the door. When she was done, she remembered it and went out to check, but Gaga was gone. It seemed that it was taken away by a woman. When Zakala came back and heard the news, she broke down immediately. She dragged her to look for Gaga everywhere. Hello, have you seen a goose? It's white and fat with a yellow mouth. It sounds like Gaga. It's about this big, and it can fly. Zakala stopped a passerby and asked. The passerby thought for a while, and then pointed at the vegetable market not far away, and said, As you just described, there are as many as you want in the vegetable market. Thank you. My Gaga is not an ordinary goose. She is unique. They're all geese. Zakala was a little disappointed, but she didn't lose her manners. Have you seen? Jeanne Funi also started to ask the passerby. However, The more they asked, the more disappointed they were. No one would notice a goose, and they couldn't provide any useful information. A goose. Maybe you could go to Mamie's to have a look. A passerby who was in a hurry was stopped and said casually, Mamie's. The two's eyes lit up. This was the first news they heard that directly pointed to a certain place. When they were about to ask for more details, the passerby had hurried away. Mother, do you think Gaga is really in Mamie's? If it's in a restaurant, would it have been eaten? Zakala looked at Jean Funi expectantly and worriedly. Don't worry. At least we got some useful information. Let's go to Mamie's first. If Gaga is really there, I can exchange 10 roast geese for it. I won't let it get hurt. Jean Funi held Zakala's hand and comforted her. Okay. Zakala nodded. Following the address Jean Funi asked from the passerby, they walked to Mamie's, which was on the east side of Aden Square. When they arrived at the entrance, they only saw 3 children playing by the door. Chapter 1972. There were 3 little girls, one of whom was 11 or 12 years old, and the other 2 were only 4 years old. They were all very cute. Zakala tried to calm herself down and went up to them. Excuse me, cute little girls, have you seen my Gaga again? Gaga? Amy stopped dancing and looked back at Zakala. What's that? Gaga is a goose, but it's not an ordinary goose. It's my baby. It's round and chubby and has a yellow beak. It's about this big and round. It's super cute. It can fly a little bit. Zakala tried to describe. Oh, I know, Amy said thoughtfully. Really? Zakala's eyes lit up immediately. She looked at Amy in surprise. Where is it? Jean Funi, who didn't have much hope, also had her eyes lit up. She looked at Amy nervously. She knew how important Gaga was to Zakara. If Gaga really disappeared because of her, she would be sad for a long time. Here, Amy turned around and lifted up Ugly Duckling, who was napping on the steps. Look, is this the one? Ugly Duckling was confused. Huh? Zakala and Jean Funi were both confused. Although this orange cat looked round and chubby with a yellow beak and was super cute, it was still a cat. She was clearly looking for a goose. Don't be fooled by its appearance. It's actually an ugly duckling, and it can fly a little bit. When spring comes, it will become a white swan and fly freely in the sky. Of course, it may not be able to fly because it's too fat, but it's okay. We can still make it into roast goose, Amy explained. Meow meow. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes wide. Did you hear that? Huh? Zakala and Jean Funi also opened their eyes. Although they didn't understand the first part of Amy's words, they heard her say she wanted to make the goose into roast goose. Oh my God, Gaga is so cute. How can you eat it? Tears were already welling up in Zakala's eyes. Today's new dish is roast goose. Goose is my favorite. It tastes better than duck. Yeah, but I don't know what kind of cooking method Mr. Mac used. The roast goose at the entrance of the square is pretty good. We have to peel off the goose's skin first. Otherwise, we won't be able to get rid of the feathers on it. The customers arrived one after another. When they saw the small blackboard hanging on the door of the restaurant, many customers who saw it for the first time began to discuss it. Kaka, you died so miserably. Zakala couldn't bear the grievance and burst into tears. This pitiful wail startled all the guests, and they all looked at her in astonishment. They're not talking about Gaga. Don't cry. Jean Funi smiled apologetically at the crowd and held Zakala's hand. But they eat goose. This restaurant roasts goose. It's so miserable. Zakala still wanted to cry. Right now, Jean Funi only wanted to give a loving kiss to the guy who had led them to a restaurant that was not friendly to geese at all, which made her have some bad associations. Then let's go to other places to look. Maybe Gaga ran to other places. It shouldn't have run so far. Jean Funi wanted to take Zakala away from this miserable place. She was afraid that Zakala would feel even worse when she saw the roast goose. No, I think Gaga is in here. I have to save it. Zakala wiped away her tears and looked at Mamie's with glowing eyes and said firmly. But Jean Funi looked at the exquisite restaurant in front of her. As the proprietress of the breakfast restaurant in Aden Square, She was no stranger to this Mamis. As the current leader of the catering industry in Chaos City, Mamis was known as the miracle of the industry. If someone said that their boss stole their goose, she would not believe it herself. If there is no business, there is no killing. I have to meet the owner of this restaurant and ask him to let Gaga out. Then I will ask him to give up on killing geese, Zakala said firmly. Zakala, as a goose lover, your mother understands your feelings. But we need to discuss this matter first. Although Gaga is very cute and very important to you, we can't stop others from eating the goose because of this. Jean Funi pulled Zakala and lowered her voice a little. But, Gaga, if there is someone who loves America one day, are you going to starve yourself to death? Amy, who had been listening to the whole conversation, looked at Zakara and interrupted. Zakala choked and didn't know what to say. Besides, the roast goose is super delicious. You can also try it. After eating our roast goose, you can forget about Gaga who flew away. Amy didn't forget to promote her new product. I don't want to eat. Zakala quickly shook her head. Then let's go. Jean Funi held Zakala's hand. No, I have to see if Gaga is inside. Zakala shook her head firmly. She looked at Mamie's signboard, took a deep breath, and seriously said, I want to line up and wait for him to open the door. All right, it's about time for lunch anyway. Let's have lunch here and try the culinary skills of the best restaurant in Chaos City. Jean Funi didn't try to persuade her anymore. At least it was better than her running around like a headless fly. Ugly Duckling, you are so ugly. No one wants you. Amy stroked Ugly Duckling's head and sighed softly. Meow, meow. I want you. Ugly Duckling is so cute. I love you. Jessica opened her arms and hugged Ugly Duckling. She rubbed her face against its furry head. Meow. Ugly Duckling rubbed its head against Jessica's chin proudly to prove that it was still wanted. It can't be helped. Jessica is just too kind. Amy sighed. Zakala stood in the front row and listened to the gluttons talking about the 1,000 ways to cook the roast goose. Tears slid down from the corners of her mouth. They're so cruel. Zakala wiped the tears from the corners of her mouth, and her stomach began to growl. Yes, they made us two women who haven't had breakfast bear the temptation that we shouldn't have. Jean Funi nodded in agreement. Zakala turned to look at Jean Funi. Jean Funi also realized that she seemed to have said something she shouldn't have. She looked a little embarrassed. She suddenly pointed to the front and said, The door is open. Zakala turned around, and the door of the restaurant was indeed opening slowly. A handsome young man in a clean chef suit walked out with a charming smile. Welcome to Mamie's. No pop-up window. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.